This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Kid Naruto Got the Cursed Byakugan. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
How does it feel to be loved? Anguished villagers huddled around a prone figure, lights and cries filling the night air. Lying in the center, Uzumaki Naruto just looked with lifeless, emotionless eyes at the approaching fists. If anything, it never once revealed the boy's true feelings. Not even when fists and feet were banging on his little body from every direction. Damn demon! How dare you stay alive? Are you trying to mock my dead husband's memory? Burn in hell like the monster you are. Naruto remained silent. He knew from experience that saying anything would only make the villagers' attack even harder. He just kept his mouth shut now, absorbing the blows as best he could with his small frame. Looks like he hasn't had enough yet. Come on, let's beat him till he's begging us. How do you like it now, demon? This doesn't even match the pain we felt when you slaughtered our families. Die like the vermin you are. With an uncontrollable exhale of pain, Naruto's body was abruptly thrown straight into a wall. It struck the firm concrete and dropped, motionless, to the ground. The villagers persisted in their careless beating of the young child, seemingly indifferent to anything. The villagers eventually left after what seemed like an eternity, satisfied with Uzumaki Naruto's now apparent dead form. Before departing, a few of the villagers decided to further humiliate the young blonde, and they spat on him as well. They didn't give a damn that their saliva mixed with the boy's blood. Naruto just lay there on the ground, not even caring that he was feeling dizzy. Oh, what's this? Just as Naruto was staring at the ground, a scandal appeared. Naruto just slid his eyes upward, too exhausted to lift his head. He was only able to make out a black yukata and two white hands in his blurry vision. Weary, Naruto did nothing more than slide his eyes closed as unconsciousness started to creep up on him. That day had been painful enough for him. He was tired. Kukakuku, seems I've found the most promising little test subject out there. I really must thank Sensei and this village for making it so easy. Kukakuku, kukahahaha. The clan head Hyuga Hiyashi's wife Hyuga Hanako grinned warmly at the medic.nin and said, "You were amazing, Hyuga Sama. Not many women would be able to move so easily barely 2 hours after birth. She was in a special room in the hospital right now, a room reserved for people giving birth. Even a lot of kunoichis would have remained bedridden following the stress of giving birth, but Hanako was already moving toward the incubation chambers, albeit very slowly. More importantly, how is my child? There is no need to worry, Hyuga Sama. Your daughter is nice and healthy. She is currently resting right now and your discharge should be in a day or two." Weary, Hanako said, "I'm glad." She was aware of the suffering that childbearing would cause, but experiencing it once more was an entirely different experience. Her mind was foggy, her body hurt, and her spirit was worn out. She was still very much looking forward to seeing her little girl. She desired to see her new family member. A fresh offspring, a renewed optimism for the clan's future. With a quick glance from the Hyuga consort and her medic assistant to the person in front of them, they asked, "Hanako, why are you out of your room?" Hyuga Hiyashi, her husband and the leader of their clan, was standing there with his arms crossed. Hanako noticed that the man was giving her a very severe frown right now, and it made her smile behind closed lips. Hiyashi could always tell what was going on underneath his exterior of coolness, even though that was always his preference. She felt a tiny twinge of happiness when she saw how concerned the man was for her. It was shown that Hyuga Hiyashi was not the heartless and emotionless leader that had been rumored. He was a sincere person. "Hiyashi Sama, it is nothing. Our clan medics had already treated the worst of my pains. As long as I do not exert myself, then there is no problem. I believe checking on my child is not something too strenuous." Hiyashi's scowl did not soften at all. Being able to see your own children is not something that you should be risking your health over. There are plenty of opportunities to see her when your body is healed. Hanako answered softly, but her gaze hardened into a severe glare. Nothing is more important than to be able to see your own children being safe and sound. Her love for her own husband wouldn't be able to quell her maternal instincts. Hiyashi just let out a sigh. He knew there was no point in arguing with her. When Hanako was prodded, she became very stubborn, and nothing made her more stubborn than wanting to see her child safe. With a look of embarrassment at what had happened earlier, Hiyashi said, "Of course. I suppose that I was being hypocritical." He had just returned from an extremely demanding council meeting and had made his way straight to the hospital. Despite his fatigue, he remained outside his wife's room and watched everything carefully. He hurried to his wife's side as soon as he heard the child was being moved closer to the incubation chamber, and as soon as he was certain she was okay, he hurried back over to his child. When Hiyashi turned away, Hanako grinned, clearly recalling his own nervousness. She moved to embrace her husband, putting her arms around his. She looked up to her husband with affection as she leaned onto his larger frame as though in need of support. "Let us go together." Most members of the public would have been shocked by such an obvious show of affection. They had always considered the Hyuga to be emotionless, stoic warriors similar to the Anbu. Hiyashi nodded while embarrassingly coughing a little. As they moved toward the incubation chamber, Hanako's smile grew larger. The lighting in the room was low to avoid disturbing the sleeping babies. The two Hyugas, whose bloodline grants them a higher sense of sight passively, did not find this to be a problem. The two deftly maneuvered through a series of incubators, finally settling on the Hyuga Hanabi incubator. With a smile, Hanako leaned forward. Her hands touched the surface of the glass shell, gently landing there. Her voice was a soft whisper, as if she was afraid to wake the sleeping baby. "Hello, my child." Joyful tears filled her eyes, slightly impairing her vision. "You have been very brave. The doctors were so afraid when you came out silent, but not once did you cry. You just stared up at us with that face, as if asking who we were. You certainly take after your father on that." The clan consort laughed as she recalled the doctor yelling in agony. "Do you know why we gave you that name? It was because when one of the doctors started to wash you, you actually bit his hand. You certainly take after your father in many things." Hanako experienced an odd sense of satisfaction just from Hiyashi's warmth. She stood up straight and gave her husband a nod. Without a word, the two left the incubation chamber. There was nothing more to say. The two Hyugas had walked out to find two pairs of curious young eyes staring up at them, asking, "Hiyashi. Sama, Hanako. Sama, how's your child?" Hanako gave a quiet smile. "Hanabi is fine. She merely needs to stay for the night, and after, we will head back together." More importantly, the clan head said in a tone that made the two young girls tense. The two's sheepish look, "Do your parents know that you are away again?" was sufficient evidence. Hanako laughed and Hiyashi sighed. Aware of the two young Hyugas in front of him, Hiyashi scowled. As the granddaughters of clan elders, Hyuga Hikari and Hyuga Ume belonged to the main family. But rather than following their family's traditional expectations and going to the hospital frequently, they frequently forego their lessons in favor of playing the part of medic ninjas. Although he personally enjoyed their joy, other members of the main branch had voiced their disapproval due to their lack of dedication to the Hyuga's traditional practices. Even the idea of branding them with the curse seal was floated, but Hiyashi put a strong stop to it. Nevertheless, many of the other members continued to harbor resentment. Hiyashi. Sama. The head of the clan glanced down at his spouse, who gave him a mischievous wink. "Let's keep this visit a secret, shall we?" Two little girls hugged the laughing Hanako, and before Hiyashi could respond, there were two squeals that echoed through the hallway, almost bringing the clan leader to his knees. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." After giving them both a gentle head pat, Hanako turned to face her husband. She laughed at the sight of him because the expression on his face was too much for her. Her husband rarely appeared so agitated. The two were inundated with questions as Ume and Hikari pressed their curiosity as the small group moved closer to Hanako's room. Hanako. Sama, did it hurt when Hanabi, Sama was coming out? Did Hanabi, Sama cry when she came out? How tired were you after? Did you break Hiyashi, Sama's hand when you were giving birth? Hanako laughed as she listened to all of their inquiries and asked, "Now why in the world would I do that?" Right now, her arms were slung loosely around her husband's elbow as she leaned on him for support. It's not as if he did anything too bad. But didn't Hiyashi, Sama get you pregnant? I heard wives usually break their husband's hands when they give birth to give them a taste of what it really feels like. Ah. Hanako laughed at Yume's sudden outburst, and Hiyashi again averted his eyes in shame. Then should I break my dear Hiyashi, Sama's hand now? After all, he did arrive a little late for Hanabi. Hiyashi smiled and took the teasing in stride. His mood lightened after hearing these relatively lighthearted jokes, especially following the meeting from which he had just returned. Hiyashi remembered the meeting from a few hours ago, and his eyes clouded. He scowled. These days, meetings were little more than shouting matches between two topics. Soon as escalating political conflicts and the Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto's execution. He was annoyed that the council, who were meant to be governing the village's welfare, felt that there was more justification for fighting over the two issues. The clan head snapped back to reality. Hiyashi. Sama, is something the matter? He shook his head and looked down at his wife, who whose worried eyes were staring up at him. "No," he answered. "Nothing is wrong." Evidently not persuaded, Hanako scowled but said nothing. The brief awkwardness was broken by Hikari's voice. "Well, you didn't answer the last question." She smiled at the assembly in front of her. "Would you break Sama's hand if you were to get pregnant again?" "Well now, I guess if I get pregnant again, then there wouldn't be a cho." Hanako started, but Hiyashi abruptly moved to make room for her. Startled, Hanako directed her gaze at her spouse, who had momentarily blocked a barrage of shuriken and kunai. "That snake," voiced, massively murderous intent, "Kukakuku. Your reaction is still as sharp as ever." Hiyashi-kun sent shivers down Hanako's back. Gradually, her gaze shifted to the open door leading to her room. A man with white skin, a black yukata, long black hair, and yellow serpentine eyes was standing next to a strange gray-haired boy. Hanako didn't need much time to figure out who that man was. Orochimaru. When Sarutobi finally lowered his ink brush, he sighed, exhausted. Not only did he have to sit through that irksome meeting for almost 2 hours, but when he returned to his administration office, he found a mountain of incomplete paperwork. "I am seriously getting too old for this." The elderly Hokage looked at the Hokage monument, which was still visible in the darkness, as he reclined in his chair and smoked. Every face projected a blank stare into the distant void, mirroring the self-imposed determination that every Hokage adopts upon being bestowed with the title. It made him think of his forebears. Unmatched in power and intelligence, the Shodai fashioned the forests that would become Konoha's boundaries using his own chakra. To the elderly Sarutobi, he was a great teacher, a wise leader, and a close friend. The Shodai who left the then large empire known as Mizugakure were followed by the Nidaime, their honorary brother. With just his chakra, he could literally build a lake that rivals those in some other countries due to his extraordinary and profound knowledge of Suiden techniques. He was known as Konoha's Sea King because of his incredible knowledge and his fabled sword, Raijin. The Yondaime. With a sigh, Sarutobi stared at his successor's young face. Konoha's Yellow Flash, Namikaze Minato, was a man who brought the village's self-esteem to unprecedented levels. His generosity had no boundaries, his fame was immense, and his talents were extraordinary. Sarutobi was hurt that he had outlived his successor. Minato gave his life in order to seal the Kyuubi no Yoko, a formidable demon, which is why he died so young. "Are you three here to curse this village?" Sarutobi asked with a melancholy smile at the stone faces. Once more, there was no reply to, "Do you curse me for being too lax?" "There are no excuses for the wrongs committed. I cannot hide behind my old age and claim that as an excuse. Too much has already happened before and I allowed that weariness to consume me. I now see that mistake and I pledge my cause. I shall right the wrong committed in this village." Sarutobi let out a sigh. He got ready to review for another night when all of a sudden he stopped. He was holding an ink brush loosely when it fell and clattered to the floor. Sarutobi jerked to his feet and shook his head in the direction of the hospital. "This chakra, it can't be, Orochimaru." The slithering man smiled broadly. He stared down the Hyuga head, his yellow slitted eyes full of madness. Hiyashi assumed a shinobi's form and met his gaze coldly. He instantly assumed the Juken stance, ready to battle to the death, as soon as he had blocked off the barrage of weapons. "Kukakuku, as cold as always." Hiyashi-kun. "Why must you be like this when we have not seen each other in nearly 10 years? Hiyashi showed no signs of moving. The telltale signs of his activated Byakugan started to show, and his eyes narrowed coldly. In spite of the circumstances and the terrifying intent to kill all around him, he spoke up coolly and said, "Why are you here, traitor? It cannot be for just a reunion. Why are you here? Why you say, Kukakuku? There are actually 2 reasons. One is right here." He gestured to the child he was carrying, who was silently with his companion. The Hyugas recognized the gray-haired man as soon as he moved the body to get a better look. That bloodied, bruised child was none other than Uzumaki Naruto, the jailer of the Kyuubi. Hanako muttered to herself, "No." The boy appeared to have experienced a battleground. His body was covered in wounds, and one of his arms appeared to be hanging by a thread. The boy opened his eyes and stirred slightly. Without any delay, Hanako was the target of Naruto's vision. She was astounded to see his soulless, lifeless eyes. How had he ended up? "You monster!" She found herself yelling out of nowhere. "What have you done to him?" "Me?" Orochimaru asked as he turned to face her, and, if it were possible, his maniacal smile got even bigger. His voice abruptly changed tone, and a full-fledged laugh burst out of his smile as he said, Little Naruto-kun here was like this when I found him. The poor little soul was beaten and humiliated by the very villagers you weaklings protect. Orochimaru gave them a mocking bow and said, I really must thank you, to provide me with the perfect test subject. But I am afraid that I will need more than just one. What are you saying? Hiyashi snapped at him, clenching his teeth. This snake, what was it playing at? Orochimaru gave him a quick glance and smiled. Hiyashi-kun is the answer, the head of the Hyuga clan said, almost trembling. Orochimaru was so happy that he was practically purring. I require more test subjects, nothing more. Hiyashi was knocked against the wall before he had a chance to react. He let out a painful gasp, but before he could strike back, the wall behind him started to change. Suddenly, the wall's concrete components moved forward and encircled his body. What? He exclaimed, unable to move. You. Now, it's not like I'm going to be killing anyone here, so there's no need for you to be so angry, Hiyashi-kun. Orochimaru smiled at him and moved to approach the three Hyuga women in front of him. The sheer force of his intent to kill had rendered both Hikari and Ume unconscious, making them relatively easy targets. Due to her weakness from childbirth, Hanako is limited in her abilities. Orochimaru knelt beside her and, disregarding Hiyashi's irate wails, used genjutsu to put her to sleep. Stop. What are you doing with my wife? Orochimaru smiled at the pinned Hyuga. Kukuku. I said that I needed more test subjects, did I not? I happen to have found 3 perfect candidates. The forms of Orochimaru and his accomplice started to melt onto the ground as he said, It has been quite nice to talk to you again, Hiyashi-kun, but I'm afraid that Kabuto and I must take our leave. Hiyashi was startled and cried out for him to stop, but it was in vain. Orochimaru was no longer there. And then Sarutobi showed up with a group of elites from Anbu. Hiyashi, what has happened? The chief of the clan was looking at the location in disbelief. He whispered, He took them. He took them. Who? Who did he take? My spouse, my kinsman. He stole them, Hiyashi said, turning to face the tense Hokage. He also took Uzumaki Naruto. What? Hiyashi inspected the location again, living through the last seconds of his wife's life as she and the snake sank into the earth. Then, with a final surge of vitality, he threw back his head and let out a single, loud cry. It expressed his lamentation and reverberated through the hallway, the entire hospital, and toward the village. Hanako. There was only one thing there when he woke up. His senses were already being assaulted by pain, a sensation that had been with him all his life. It ripped at him, tore at his awareness, and made fun of his helplessness. Anguish. Burning agony. Oh, how he wished it would end already. The level of intensity this experience has given him is unlike anything he has ever experienced in all his ordeals. He was able to hear some words spoken through the darkness, though his senses were dulled by the intense pain he was experiencing. It would appear that the technique was a success. There is a lot of chakra coming out of him. Is this possibly a side effect? It doesn't matter. Proceed with the experiment. These kind of reliable test subjects are not very common. His body trembled against the burning pain as it entered his senses once more. When he tried to finally let out a painful scream, he opened his mouth only to find that it was tightly sealed. He fell into unconsciousness again after receiving another shock of pain. Inside the Hyuga mansion, everything was quiet. Those who were directly involved in the event took a seat in the meeting hall, their faces solemn. The 2 mothers were the only ones weeping silently, still grieving for their lost children. Sarutobi sat down with them and could understand them. The Hyuga clan was already dealt a blow by the possible loss of their clan secrets, so to lose their wife and children all at once must have devastated those who were close. Hyuga Hiyashi sat in the center of the group. Even though Sarutobi could see that he was making an effort to keep up that serious appearance, the elderly Hokage was aware that his wife's kidnapping had caused additional hurt to an already broken heart. Seeing his wife kidnapped must have made him realize how much he had to give up in the form of Hyuga Hizashi, his twin brother. Hiyashi, gazing up from the floor mat, the head of the Hyuga clan met the eyes of the elderly Hokage. They exchanged a look for a moment before Hiyashi turned back to face the floor mat. Forgive me. In shock, everyone turned back to stare at him. To witness Hyuga Hiyashi, their leader, bowing before them and resting his head on the ground. Forgive me. Hiyashi said again. I was not strong enough. I let Orochimaru take what's important to us in that moment of weakness. Please pardon this stupid leader for letting your kids get abducted. The mother of Hyuga Hikari, the woman standing next to him, started to tremble. Her sobs became louder and louder until her husband softly put a hand on her shoulder. His eyes were serious but unwavering as he held her and looked up at his leader. We forgive you. With determination, he answered. And please, forgive us for not allowing you the time to grieve over the loss of your own. While continuing to cry softly on her husband's chest, his wife nodded. Yes, your forgiveness is not something we deserve. Hiyashi looked over to the other side, where Hyuga Yume's mother grinned at him. She bowed too, even though her own tears had not stopped yet. Please forgive us for not being there to protect Hanako-sama. Everyone, you have my most sincerest gratitude. Sarutobi grinned at the sight in front of him. This clan demonstrated that they were among the strongest in the village by refusing to give up easily in spite of the heartbreak they had endured. He could see that the burning wall of fire was as strong as anyone in the village within each of those hazy, pale orbs. He smiled, rose soundlessly from his chair, and walked out of sight. Maybe everything won't be lost. Hanako was worn out. No other word could adequately express how her body begged to be allowed to finally drift into unconsciousness. But she refused to let herself fall into the safety of her unconsciousness. When she had fainted, she had already paid that price and ended up in the prison of one of the biggest traders in Konoha. She now discovered that a seal had locked Hikari and Yume's movements, as well as her own. They had to watch as Orochimaru carried out his bizarre experiments on the young Jinchuriki, as if that wasn't heartbreaking enough. Another spine. Tingling scream erupted from where Orochimaru was experimenting, and the Hyuga consort winced and turned away. She hated that as a young child, an innocent being had to endure such agony by being confined and defenseless. Fresh from giving birth to Hanabi, her maternal instincts begged her to murder the person causing the young boy's suffering. Hanako. Sama. Hanako looked back at Hikari right away. She had just woken up. Hiriko. Sama. In what location are we? The last thing I recalled was experiencing a wave of fear that eventually overwhelmed me. Ah. The young Hyuga halted right away and focused on the operating area in front of her. She could see that two men were operating on a small person right now. Her eyes grew wide at what she saw. There was an abundance of blood. Even the faint smell of disinfectant, which she could hardly detect, was overwhelmed by the stench of blood. Hanako. Sama. Hikari's form was starting to quiver with fear. Who are those people? Orochimaru. The young Hyuga tensed up visibly as the previous night's memories tore at her. And the one whom they are operating on is little Uzumaki. Her voice was barely audible as she whispered, "No, was that the little blonde girl under anesthesia, the one she had occasionally seen?" She was aware of Orochimaru's experiments on humans. It sickened her to think that he would do it to someone she had seen. What do we do, Hanako? Sama. I don't know. Biting her lip, Hanako cast her gaze downward. Only the two other Sannin and Hokage. Sama himself have the ability to overcome Orochimaru in the village. Furthermore, I don't think we can leave this place with ease. Ooh. Hanako and Hikari both pivoted and directed their gaze to their left. Ume slowly started to get up off the ground in front of them. Her limbs were immediately shackled when she attempted to move. What is this? Hello, Hanako. Sama. Hikari. What is happening? As Hikari explained the circumstances, Hanako just closed her eyes in sorrow. We've been taken prisoner by Orochimaru. We're not sure where this location is. Ume deserves credit for not losing it like Hanako and Hikari had anticipated. Rather, she just silently peered down at the floor beneath her. I apologize, Hanako. Chan. Have I not taken care of those two young Hyugas and you? Orochimaru's smiling face met the three of them as they snapped awake. But the thing that startled them the most was how much blood was on his surgical clothes. Fearfully, Hanako flicked her gaze to the operating table and hurriedly turned on her Byakugan. What she saw was a bloody figure that didn't look much like the little blonde she had occasionally seen. His muscles and sinews were bleeding, as if someone had literally torn off the skin covering his entire body, from his chest to his torso. Kukakuku. You don't have to be concerned, Hanako. Chan. The boy will soon be healed by his little tenant. As the Sannin had predicted, steam slowly started to emerge from the boy's body. To Hanako's surprise, the skin. Ripped sections gradually started to regenerate, revealing smooth, flawless skin. The demon did not appear to want to perish either. Now, who shall I start with? Hanako abruptly turned back to face Orochimaru. With a chuckle to himself, the snake Sannin was gazing at the two younger Hyugas. With fear in their eyes, Ume and Hikari made an unconscious attempt to turn away from him. The snake Sannin suddenly reached down and firmly grasped Hikari's wrist. His amusement intensified as the youthful Hyuga flinched in agony. Yes, you shall do nicely. No. Ume attempted to stand up, but the chains held her in place. Stay away from her. Kukakuku. This little specimen will be part of a special experiment. After releasing the restraints, Orochimaru lifted Hikari and held her up. With a twisted kind of perversity, his long, snake-like tongue floated down to the shivering Hyuga and licked her cheek. Very special indeed. Ume was abruptly backhanded across the face before she could react, causing her to fall to the ground and scream in agony. Hikari tried to free herself from the Sannin's hold, but to no avail. He was just too powerful. Orochimaru just smiled and ignored the young Hyuga's cries as she started to drag her out of the room. Hanako. Sama. Hanako scowled at Orochimaru with narrowed eyes. Her Byakugan flared fiercely against the darkened room, unleashing her deadly intent on the Sannin. But Orochimaru just laughed and carried on walking, utterly dispelling her desire to kill. She cursed herself angrily for being so weak. She now views this as the reason why the man is using her as a surrogate daughter for his deformed experiments. Hikari, silently, the older Hyuga looked at the younger one, regretting her own powerlessness to keep them safe. Ume clung to the elderly Hyuga and wept quietly in her arms. It wasn't equitable. Hikari was the most compassionate girl she had ever met, but now she was being utilized for research. It was definitely not fair. From inside the Hyuga compound, it was dark, and not many people would stay awake at that hour. Hiyashi could finally brood over the loss of his wife and the two girls he saw as daughters because the solitude gave him the companion he needed. Hiyashi could not resist staying up late because it was just too depressing to return to bed without his wife's inspoken warmth. The betrayer of the Sannin, Orochimaru, had seemingly defeated him with ease. The head of the Hyuga clan was not looking forward to admitting that he was one of Konoha's worst enemies. Still, there was nothing he could do about it. The leader of the Hyuga clan was powerless to stop the snake, and before he knew it, the man had taken those valuables from him. Hanako. My cherished spouse. Forgive me, please, for being too feeble. Father. Hiyashi, taken aback, turned his head in the direction of the opening. His gaze quickly settled on a startled-looking Hinata. He cursed himself in his head for going so deep inside his own thoughts. He wouldn't have known if there had been an assassin until the knife was practically in his throat. Hinata. He was having difficulty keeping his voice composed. What's wrong? You ought to be sleeping in bed. The 5-year-old heiress appeared to be almost ashamed as she looked down. Even that small gesture brought to mind his beloved wife, who had been equally shy if not slightly more enthusiastic about certain things in their youth. Pain sang in his heart. He was alone with Hanako. She was taken from him and from everyone by the betraying snake. Anyo, Hiyashi turned back to his daughter, who was twitching the hem of her yukata a little. I had trouble falling asleep. Normally, mother would lull me to sleep, but today she wasn't there. Did something take place? Indeed, something occurred. Hiyashi was so frustrated that she felt like screaming it out. We were all taken away from your mother. But he remained silent, watching his shy daughter become more and more embarrassed over time. At last, he raised his voice in an emotionless voice. Your mother will no longer be lulling you to sleep. Hinata. Learn to grow up. It is unrealistic to expect someone to sing you to sleep every night, is it? Hinata pursed her lips, clearly not liking his words, but... Go to bed, Hinata. But, did you not hear me? The room became denser and Hiyashi's eyes hardened into a pair of frosty orbs. Both Hiyashi and Hinata were unaware that he was giving off a very low level of killing intent, and although this did not make Hiyashi faint, Hinata was terrified to be in the line of fire. You are the main family's heir apparent. Until you are old enough to give commands yourself, you are expected to obey them. Hyuga Hiyashi has now given Hyuga Hinata the following command. Go to bed and forget any silly ideas you have that your mother will ever lull you to sleep again. Hinata gave a literal start upon hearing her father's icy tone. She looked up at her father, her eyes wide with fear, her whole body trembling. Tears soon welled up from those innocent lavender orbs, but she bowed and ducked her head, clearly distressed, before storming out of her father's room. Hiyashi maintained the icy exterior for quite some time, only letting himself revert to his tired self once he was certain Hinata was beyond his Byakugan reach. He really didn't mean to frighten his little Hinata in such a horrible way, but he couldn't help but swat at her face because it was such a great mirror and he felt so much like Hanako seeing her act so innocently and meekly. It hurt him. Not only had his cherished wife passed away, but his little daughter also bore a striking resemblance to her that made him feel pain just by gazing at her. It is for her own good. Gently, as if to reassure the silent night sky, he spoke up. She is loving, compassionate, and kind. This may be interpreted by many as a sign of weakness. Orochimaru used my wife, Hikari, and Ume as 3 examples. For Hinata to thrive in this world, she must develop her physical and emotional strength. Even though he was speaking, Hiyashi could hardly help but notice the turns his heart would take with each sound he made. Even though it felt like he was rejecting the idea from within, he didn't waver. With a promise to treat Hinata and Hanabi as mere potential heiresses, he looked up at the night sky. He will be viewed as the head of the clan, Hyuga Hiyashi, rather than as their father, Hiyashi. Sitting there, Hiyashi noticed that the natural animals that lived in his pond had suddenly stopped chirping and croaking. It seemed as though they were as disapproving of his resolve as his heart was. Hiyashi said nothing as he fixed his gaze on the silent white moon, searching for the signs that did not shine, the answers that did not exist, and the hope that did not exist. Naruto cautiously opened his eyes in the shadowy chamber. How much time has passed since he last experienced anything other than pain? Naruto couldn't even begin to count the instances in which he wished he could pass away. However, Naruto's life would not end despite the numerous wounds he had sustained and the copious amounts of blood he had shed. He was unable to even determine if that was a good or bad thing. "Ah, I see that you're awake, Naruto-kun." The young blonde looked to his right and met Yakushi Kabuto's emotionless gaze right away. The young teenager slid his glasses back in and gestured to a tray next to him. He could see a syringe already filled with a transparent liquid inside of it. The already dimmed eyes of Naruto grew cloudier. "It is time for your next test. Please try and relax this time." Even so, the blonde did not respond. He was aware that if he resisted, all he would accomplish would be to be physically restrained. All Naruto did was close his eyes and stay still. Before long, he heard Kabuto's footsteps getting closer and closer, until he could almost feel him beside him. "I see you've realized how useless it is to resist, Naruto-kun. Now this might hurt a little, but I'm sure Orochimaru Sama's latest creation will not kill you." A tiny tingle in his arm indicated that the syringe was filling it with fluid. And then his system was overwhelmed with pain again. Naruto's whole body started to tremble, and his eyes shot open. His body burned with pain, and his mouth parted in a silent scream. Inside his body, dormant nerves suddenly erupted as if they were being shocked with electricity. Unknown bones appeared out of nowhere, revealing inhuman cracks. Even his brain, which had been rendered numb by innumerable horrors, roared and hammered through his skull as though it were trying to escape. "It seems that the concoction is working. Oyasumi, Naruto-kun." Even in pain, Naruto was able to look in the direction of the retreating Kabuto. He promised to seek revenge for what had happened to him through the hazy field of pain. His half-lidded eyes narrowed icily at the medic backing away, and then he fell back into the abyss again. An enormous and very powerful killing intent pounded through Kabuto's forehead from outside Naruto's cell. Sweat trickled from his body as he tensed up against the terrifying image it projected, only for it to vanish as swiftly as it had appeared. He watched for a few more seconds, looking for any trace of that deadly aura from before. He sighed and continued on his way out when he saw none. "Naruto-kun, you are truly becoming a very frightening child," Kabuto said, shaking his head as the last of his fear dipped away from his consciousness. Following the lengthy hallway, the youthful medic.nin let his thoughts wander to the 2 subjects Orochimaru thought appropriate for testing. As the container for the Kyuubi no Kitsune, Uzumaki Naruto was perhaps the best test subject imaginable. Even though Naruto's body was extremely delicate on its own, almost every experiment that was conducted on him healed a few days later, demonstrating the remarkable powers of the fox's regeneration. There were, undoubtedly, a few experiments that had rather strange side effects. Kabuto could still clearly recall Orochimaru's initial experiment on the boy. He had created a novel method that was imprisoned in the shape of a seal with the intention of achieving everlasting youth. However, the seal didn't make the body get any younger, rather, it made him grow faster. In reality, Naruto had aged a full year by the time the seal was removed. It was likely the first time Kabuto had ever seen Orochimaru smile so broadly in satisfaction. Even though Kabuto does not even hope to understand what goes through the snake's head, he had a sense that the method would be employed more frequently as time went on. However, something doesn't feel quite right. Kabuto narrowed his eyes, letting his thoughts return to the youthful blonde. Nevertheless, after realizing how pointless it was to fight, he grew more submissive. Rarely, though, were those times when Kabuto's murderous intent was sufficient to stop him cold. Even though he knew it wasn't the Kyuubi because it was emitting purely human chakra, the volume and berserk fury were still enough to take on Orochimaru on a bad day. Maybe Orochimaru Sama is raising a monster without our knowledge. Kabuto simply shook his head and peered at his clipboard. A pleased smile quickly appeared on his face as he read the name that came next. Hyuga Hikari. Orochimaru's attempt to test a theory he had developed was his other experiment. In the ninja community, there had been speculation about which dujutsu originated from which. Believing that the Sharingan descended from the Byakugan, Orochimaru took the Hyuga away for experimentation. However, following the maturation of that young seal, the young Hyuga girl was repurposed for breeding. And I would much rather stay for experiments like these, Kabuto says, letting out a deep laugh as he recalls the experiment in great detail. Ultimately, it was him who was credited with deflowering the Hyuga. The combination of her tearful expression from that time and his overwhelming sense of dominance had reawakened the old blood in him. He had continued until she was almost completely unconscious. He came to a stop and raised his head to face the door in front of him. When Kabuto saw the experiment number on the door, he smirked and opened it. Hyuga Hikari's strapped form appeared inside and gave him an instant glare. With a laugh, Kabuto turned to face her. Then he leaned down and gave her swollen stomach a gentle stroke, which made the girl's body tremble uncontrollably. "And how," he muttered, "is our child doing?" She answered right away. The force she used to free herself actually caused the retaining bed to tremble, but her limb straps were holding firm. She had no intention of leaving anytime soon. Kabuto just gave her a mocking smirk and waved a finger. He corrected. "You shouldn't be trying to hurt yourself, not when you are so ready to give birth to our little baby." Hikari angrily retorted, "She's not our baby. She's mine. There is no way I can allow a child, any child, to be left with the likes of you." She took a hard hit, and her head snapped to the side. Kabuto cupped her chin and forced her to look at him, grinning darkly. "Oh dear me. You must forgive me. My hand had just slipped that moment. Now what was it that you were saying?" Hikari spit in his face in return. Kabuto ignored the blood and saliva that splattered and trickled down his cheek. Hikari gritted her teeth in rage. "You may have given me this child in the worst way possible, but she is still my child, and there is no way you can get her either than over my dead body." "Oh, is that all it will take?" Kabuto asked, his smile growing as he noticed her abruptly becoming even more rigid. "The light-haired medic.nin said, I'm sure that can be arranged. Good day to you, my dear," and left the room, utterly oblivious to the sudden growth of fear and despair inside of her. Next on the list is Hyuga Hinako opened her eyes as the room's darkness began to fade. She could see Yakushi Kabuto's familiar form looming over her from where the door was. She cursed the man again in her mind for robbing Hikari of her innocence. Still, she was powerless to take any action. She was unable to harm the teenager because of the chains that restrained her. Ume shifted restlessly next to her in opposition to the light that peeked through the shadows. She opened her eyes again, and this time they focused on Kabuto's silhouette after glancing around in confusion. How are you two doing today, Orochimaru? Sama would be very displeased if he were to learn that our two guests would die without us noticing." Angrily, Hinako narrowed her eyes. The tone Kabuto used was so mocking that her fists instantly clenched. Kabuto sighed and shook his head at this. "Anger does not suit one such as yourself. Try and calm down a little, Hyuga Sama." Ume cried out, "You!" But the manacles refused to come off. Kabuto grinned as he turned to face the youthful Hyuga. Ume started to struggle more than ever very quickly. She needed a chance, any chance at all, to reach that man and destroy him completely. But there were no chances, and she knew she had little to no chance of hitting the silver-haired youth even as he approached her with that mocking smirk. Kabuto jerked her face upward to meet his icy gaze, but her arms went limp at her sides. She would not take her eyes off the person who had raped Hikari, though, and continued to stare with defiance. For a short while, she was met with blank stares until Kabuto, clearly bored, let go of his cheek and gave her a stern backhand. Ume silently gasped as the force of his blow caused her whole body to topple over. Kabuto pulled her face up to meet his eyes again as she struggled to stand, reaching down to grab a fistful of her raven black hair. His already cold onyx eyes grew even more hard as he said, "I do not appreciate those eyes of yours, little Hyuga. Know your place in this world. You." Kabuto again gave her the backhand before Ume could say anything more. When some blood started to trickle out of the Hyuga's mouth, he grinned cruelly. But before he could carry on enjoying himself, the room's deadly intent flared up. The medic.nin tensed up, looking straight at the Hyuga matriarch right away. With her Byakugan activated, Hanako's eyes were blazing, and despite the manacle's searing seals that suppress chakras, her chakra was flaring so much that it was visible all around her. Immediately, Kabuto tensed up and moved away from the injured Hyuga. He raised his hands in an attempt to appear pacifying and said, Now. Anger really does not suit you, Hyuga sama. The placating manner did nothing but enrage her further. The manacles around Hanako's wrists and ankles vibrated with the power of her chakra as her Byakugan flared with rage. The whisper that came out of her mouth said, Leave. But Kabuto could clearly see what she wanted, her killing intent hammering against his skull. The medic. Nin quickly jotted down a few notes on the clipboard and continued. Even though he was frequently praised for his skill as a shinobi, Kabuto was aware of his limitations. It was a foolish decision to test them against the furious Hyuga matriarch, especially since it was obvious that her chakra was being forcefully suppressed by the chakra suppression seals. Kabuto clenched his eyes and pounded his fist against the wall across from him as soon as he left the room. His mood did not improve as he stormed off towards his research room, nor did the pain that followed or the abrupt collapse of the wall. Hyuga Hinata examined herself closely in front of her room's mirror, making sure that nothing would catch the attention of people who wouldn't normally see her. Despite her shy nature and the likelihood that she would remain silent for years to come, she was determined to leave a positive impression on everyone she met. She didn't want her weakness to be perceived by others. The young heiress rubbed her arms and winced at some memories from the past, as though trying to recall what had happened in the past. Her clan had already written off her sluggish progress in the Jukan as a failure, so even though she knew it would probably be in vain, trainings were intensified even further in an attempt to at least develop some talent within her. But what was waiting for her was not the intimidating Hyuga clan walls. Her new life at the Shinobi Academy was what was in store for her. She reasoned that even if she were unable to develop any talent worthy of the title of heiress, at least she might be able to help others out on missions. That made Hinata twitch a little. Yes, she thought hopeful. I can still try to help others even if I end up failing. With a shake of her head, Hinata pushed away the pesky depression. With haste, she slipped on her scandals and left the building, pausing only to offer prayers to her mother's picture. Well then. I'll be off, mother. The youthful Hyuga exited the compound and quickly made her way to the academy by sliding the door from behind her. Hinata could not help but think of the day she would be able to stroll down these streets with pure happiness on her face as she made her way through the streets that led to the academy. That seemed like a very long time ago. Hinata bit her lip, happy memories of the past bubbling to the surface of her subconscious. Everything had been joyful and happy back then. Her parents were there to love her back then. Her father views her as nothing more than a betrayal of the clan's heritage now that her mother has vanished and is thought to be dead. The elders, who she perceived as being indifferent, saw her as a weakling unfit to inherit the throne. Some even started speculating about designating her younger sister as the heir and integrating her into the branch family. With a blink, Hinata halted her sprint. She was surprised to find trails of warm liquid when her small, delicate hands felt slowly up her cheeks. Was she in tears? Shaking her head, Hinata furiously rubbed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. But no matter how hard she tried, the tears refused to stop. The fact that hardly anyone was on the streets pleased Hinata. It would be a lifelong shame for her if any of them saw her crying so uncontrollably. It was disliked by Hinata. The tears, the isolation, her father's coldness, the death of her mother, and even the loss of her own will. She desired support from someone. Hinata sorely needed a shoulder to cry on, but she was afraid of what might happen if she was discovered doing it. She yearned for someone to relieve her of the loneliness that weighs on her soul. Hey, what's wrong? With horror that someone had finally noticed her crying, the young Hyuga snapped her head upward. But when her gaze finally settled on the one who had spoken to her, she was astounded by what she saw. Here before her, dressed in a baggy beige shirt and black shorts, was a boy she'd seen many times crossing this very street. Even for his age, his small frame belied his innocence, leading many to believe he was younger. His clothes appeared tattered, as though they had seen a lot before being eventually given to the boy to wear. His large, innocent eyes betrayed a certain darkness, as though he had seen a great deal in his short life. His brilliant sapphire eyes stared back at her, bewildered. 3 whisker. Like birthmarks were etched on both sides of his cheeks, which she thought gave him a cute appearance. At last, his golden blonde hair fluttered in a disheveled manner, seemingly reflecting the sunlight. The boy cocked his head to the side, asking a question that had Hinata spellbound. The boy was someone she knew. A name fluttered from just below the surface, even though it has been so long since she last saw him. With a thought, Hinata closed her eyes. He went by the name of. My name's Uzumaki Naruto. What's your name? Yes, that is correct. For the first time in a long time, Hinata smiled warmly as she opened her eyes once more. She recalled his previous generosity to her and the way he would play with her as if titles didn't matter. She most definitely remembered his smile. It was so bright that it bore a striking resemblance to the sun. Naruto.kun. Suddenly, the boy developed a mischievous side. After walking away, he turned around and walked back to her, beckoning her with his hands. Come on. I want to show you something. Unexpectedly disappearing around the corner, Hinata followed confused behind him. The young blonde seemed to vanish and then reappear in unexpected places, making it hard to keep up with him. Nevertheless, Hinata was always able to keep him in sight and never trailed too far in her endeavors. Come on. We're almost there. Running after the elusive blonde, Hinata panted. After a while of running, Hinata realized that she had reached her limit, despite the admiration of some for her endurance. Nevertheless, she persisted in her pursuit of the blonde, her expression fixed on determination. Streets and stores soon faded into blurs as her only concern was keeping up with the blonde. Haha, good job Hinata. Chan, look around, we made it. At once Hinata halted and leaned forward to try and catch her breath. Sweat trickled from her face down her armpits and onto the ground, making her pant repeatedly. She was surprised, though, as a light breeze passed by and quickly cooled her down. Hinata slowly stood up and took a quick look around to figure out where she was. She gasped as her mouth fell open. The area she was in was surrounded by tall, dense trees on all sides. A stunning river that gleamed in the sunlight emerged from a rocky shoreline in the very center. When Hinata noticed the water churning, she looked a little further to the right, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the gorgeous waterfall that was churning out crystal, clear water. It's beautiful, isn't it? Gazing sideways, Hinata fixed her gaze on the diminutive blonde who had guided her to the hidden location. Naruto was beaming at her, as if he was pleased to have discovered such a lovely location. Hinata grinned. Now she recalled. Naruto had guided her to this location since their first encounter, and it was there that he declared her to be his first friend. Hinata's pale lavender eyes welled up with tears, which she bowed her head quickly to wipe away. Hey, what's wrong? She felt a soft, warm weight drop gently onto her head. While attempting to dry her tears, Hinata raised her gaze. Standing directly in front of her, Naruto was giving her an awkward head rub with one of his hands. Hinata cast her gaze back, embarrassed to have shown a vulnerability to anyone. She was a terrible failure even at holding on to her feelings. Hey, it's okay. Hinata raised her head again. She was reminded of how comforting Naruto's genuine smile was as he smiled at her. She wiped away the last of her tears quickly and smiled gratefully at the boy. She then abruptly realized that Naruto didn't look right in his form. He seemed to have even more light on his skin than would be considered normal for some reason. Furthermore, he looked exactly the same as when she had first met him almost a year ago. Nay, Hinata. Chan, this will be our little secret, okay? Naruto smiled again, and Hinata understood at that moment. Once again, tears slowly rose to her eyes, but she did not move to wipe them away. Rather, her heart sang with joy and longing, and her smile grew. She whispered something quietly while closing her eyes in appreciation for him. Thank you. Once more, she opened her eyes to find Naruto gone, as though he had never existed. From the dark room, Hyuga Hanako slowly opened her eyes. The sound of dripping water replaced the dampness of the walls all around her. The room's darkness seemed to swell and warp, taking on the appearance of terrifying creatures straight out of a person's nightmares. The Hyuga closed her eyes once more right away. She should not have been in the room for so long. Every moment she spent alive and every second she spent confined to the room served as a reminder to her that someone she loved was going to subject her only child to experimentation. The idea that there was nothing she could do about it hurt her. Hanako. Sama, the matriarch of the Hyuga clan, uttered as she quickly raised her Byakugan and looked in the direction of the voice. Hyuga Ume was lying there, a few feet away, and she was also using her Byakugan. After a little silence, Hanako changed her mind and quietly responded, Yes, Ume-chan? It seems like today is the day, Hanako said with a nod, causing Yume's eyes to fill with tears. Yume's form curled up into a ball and she started to shake as soft sobs resounded throughout the room. It's not fair. Hikari. Nisan shouldn't have to deal with this. Why does Kami? Sama hate us so? Ume said. Hanako remained silent as well, not believing she could speak either. She did, however, shuffle a bit nearer to the distraught Hyuga and encircle her with her arms. It was all the solace she could offer. Hikari's baby was due to be born today. Ha. It would appear that the operation was a success. Orochimaru. Sama, it has the bloodline. Ha. N.No. Good. Take it to the incubation chamber. I shall start my preparations soon. N.No. G. Give her back, understood. What shall we do with her? Her nerves are practically destroyed. She cannot fight even if someone were to heal her forever. I have a plan. Her body may be useless now, but those eyes, kukakukukuku. My child, give me back my child, give me back my child. Uzumaki Naruto heard a cry of anguish and hopelessness as he awakened from his restless sleep. The sorrow it carried pierced his silence as it echoed through the empty halls and into his own room. It seems like someone recently lost something important. Whatever they were, Naruto had sympathy for them. The young blonde's head swiveled to the side, falling instantly upon the smirking form of Yakushi Kabuto. Oh, what's this? Naruto-kun. You're actually not pretending to be asleep? She asked. The restraints tightened against the force of his attempts to break free as soon as his eyes narrowed icily. This was among the reasons his time here had been nothing but misery. Kabuto grinned, realizing that he had succeeded when he saw Naruto's face. The way the little boy's bindings would ache but never break, or how his eyes would grow chilly, never grew old. It was similar to witnessing a beast attempt to bite you only to have its leash draw back, serving as a reminder that it was only an imprisoned creature. Before the young blonde could respond, Kabuto inserted a well-known syringe into his arm and said, "Today will be quite a treat for your Naruto-kun. Don't worry, you'll like it for sure." He saw the boy's smirking face for the last time before he was enveloped in darkness once more. A scream of pain echoed through the chambers, startling Hanako and splitting her eyes open. The pain was so intense that her eyes widened in horror. It seemed like someone was tearing apart their entire being. As she said her name, her mouth fell open in shock. Hikari. Hanako. Sama. The harsh sound of Yume's voice echoed through the prison cell. The Hyuga matriarch turned to see Yume's enraged expression and her Byakugan lit up in her eyes. The anger inside of her made her voice shake as she spoke. What are they doing to Hikari? Nisan. Hanako gave a headshake. She could not have known even with her Byakugan. Based on the echo's length, she could not possibly hope to make it there given the distance. She became frustrated at not being able to find out what was happening to someone she loved so much. She was infuriated that she was powerless to stop it. A second scream sounded in the corridors, startling both Hyugas and making them pay attention. They were familiar with that voice because they had heard it before as he protested against the hatred of both shinobi and civilians in the streets. His scream was so full of agony at that moment that Hanako wanted to look away in shame and closed her eyes. What on earth were they doing to each other, both of them? The screams went on for what seemed like hours, filling the hallways and resonating in long, tortuous pitches. Hanako covered her ears and closed her eyes, trying to shut out the heartbreaking sound that seeped into their cell. Then the screams changed all of a sudden. Hanako opened her eyes and peeked behind her ears, curious to know what was so different. Even though the noise continued to reverberate throughout the hallway, something was wrong. However, what? Hanako. Sama, the enslaved matriarch, turned back to face the terrified little Ume, her eyes wide with despair. She stammered out, tears gathering in her eyes as she spoke. I can't hear Hikari. Nisan's voice anymore. Hanako stopped dead in her tracks and looked back at the screams, eagerly scanning for any indication of Hikari's voice. However, it was not feasible. To Hanako, the fact that Hikari had completely stopped screaming was terrifying. She started to feel a sense of dread and searched frantically for any way to make sure Hikari was safe. Nothing helped, and Hanako was left feeling utterly and totally helpless as she listened to the soft cries of Ume and the waning screams of the little Uzumaki. When Hinata unexpectedly found herself face to face with two other academy girls, she was unsure of what to do. They were Yamanaka Ino and Haruno Sakura, two adorable girls who seemed to be well liked by everyone in their class. They were often playing games or chatting with other girls. Perhaps Hinata experienced a small amount of jealousy due to their fame. When they called her Hyuga Sama, of course, she was mortified and maybe even a little enraged. Talking to her as Hyuga, rather than Hinata, felt like chatting with any member of her tribe. It seemed to her that they were speaking to her as the heir apparent to the clan rather than to Hyuga Hinata as a singular person. She was obviously too shy to talk about that. Following their rather awkward introductions, the three of them had discussed a lot of their life goals. Actually, Yamanaka and Haruno had both done so while she mainly paid attention. However, all of a sudden, the topic of conversation turned to Uchiha Sasuke, a different student in their class. Hinata found the conversation, to put it bluntly, to be completely boring. She was not fond of hearing about the last Uchiha's perpetual, amazing qualities, particularly the way the two kept pronouncing them aloud. Then, when the two started fighting and yelling at each other for even trying to take Sasuke-kun, her boredom and annoyance turned to complete confusion. It was obvious that they had overlooked her presence as well. Thus, Hinata was left in complete confusion when the two girls started a pretend yelling war before sulking and turning to leave. It was a very strange sight to behold. However, Hinata was able to recall someone who would have understood her better by observing the two of them argue about the Uchiha. In fact, his brazen demeanor would have simply told those girls to shut up for her. Hinata's memories were clear. Bright blue eyes and messy, sun-kissed hair. The adorable whisker marks that adorned both sides of his face came next. Finally, Hinata recalled the smile that had amazed her the first time she saw it because it was so vibrant and bright. Hinata was positive that she would have been close friends with Uzumaki Naruto, even though she didn't really know him. She thought back to the kindness he'd shown her, how he'd supported her when she was crying and thought she was hated. She recalled his thoughtful remarks and the steps he took to ease her discomfort. The thing that hurt her the most was knowing this. Nearly a year had passed since Naruto went missing. It alarmed her that he was not in the customary hiding places that he had previously shown her, and that not even the Hokage knew his precise whereabouts at this point. She yearned to see him once more in order to be happy and smile once more. However, the sunshine vanished with him, and despite her best efforts, Hinata was unable to genuinely find much happiness in her life without him. It was depressing to learn and even more depressing to realize how much she had missed his company. Yakushi Kabuto, walking slowly in the direction of a bridge on the edge of their covert base, sighed with a deep sense of exhaustion. He had his limitations even though the experimentation had been a great success and a pleasure to watch. He was extremely exhausted after being under constant observation for 2 full days without the use of soldier pills or anything similar to help keep him awake. He still can't be upset with the outcome. It is likely that Uzumaki Naruto experienced a upgrade in his condition. Even though Kabuto had voiced concerns about his ability to control the Kyuubi container, Orochimaru had promised that the application of the curse seal would supersede any disobedience he might have harbored. Naruto's extremely unstable state at the time was the only reason he was not given the curse seal then and there. He is very close to the end of his life, and even though here the Kyuubi inside of him are what keep his body intact, there is a 50% chance that he won't survive despite his amazing healing abilities. Since the curse seal already had a high death rate, adding it would essentially eliminate all of his chances of surviving, and neither Kabuto nor Orochimaru wanted to forfeit a priceless specimen. When Kabuto at last arrived at the bridge, he was shaken from his reverie. He took a brief moment to examine the contents of the portfolio he was holding before moving to the center of the bridge. Kabuto felt something cold and long, like a snake, slither up his body almost instantly. "You're late." Kabuto turned to face the person who had spoken so close to him, a flat, stern, and frigid voice. As soon as he realized, his eyes grew wide, and he dropped into a respectful bow. He even-handedly replied, "Please forgive me. I had to cover some of the more delicate matters of our new ward to ensure his survival." The voice was cold and flat, but it sounded like it was not at all happy. Indeed. Trust the snake to go ahead and further his own ends instead of that of organization. "Tell me, is the Kyuubi container alive?" "For the moment." "Good. Hand over the information. I want to see what he has been doing with it." "Yes, sir." Nothing was said for a while as the figure studied the meticulously detailed data regarding the experiments conducted on Uzumaki Naruto. The cloaked figure continued to leaf through mostly, noting possible areas of interest, before landing on the final page and the most recent experiment completed. Kabuto tensed abruptly, the intent to kill hanging heavy in the air. His body started to perspire heavily as he noticed how suddenly thick the air became. His eyes widened. He had nearly forgotten how lethal his master's temper could get. The figure turned back to the trembling young ninja, saying, "So, that snake dares try and meddle with the organization? Our leader will be most displeased with this betrayal. As for you, when you are certain that Uzumaki's condition is stable, return him and the 2 captives back to Konoha, away from the snake." "Sir, are you questioning me?" Once again, the air became thick, and Kabuto quickly shook his head in terror. He acknowledged his superior with a quick bow. "As you wish, Sasori. Sama. Come to think of it, take that little infant with them as well." That put an end to Kabuto entirely. Evidently shocked, the young man fixed his gaze on his teacher. Just as he was struggling to think of a way to hold onto the baby, the chilling touch of that story suddenly enveloped him, squeezing him just enough to make the killing intent flare and narrow and condense on his spot. Kabuto's chest constricted enough that he was unable to breathe. Sweat spurted from his body like raindrops. bulging his eyes and activating his pores. "I will not hear another word of insubordination or your head will be the price." Kabuto bowed quickly before his master, gasping for breath when the tail was released. Then, clearly fearing for his life but determined to follow orders, he hurried back to the hideout. Sasori's eyes narrowed as he watched his puppet race back toward the hideout from across the bridge. He muttered coldly, "This is the last of your meddling former teammate. I'll make sure that by the time I am done with you, you won't even be fit to clean my works or the dirt on my feet, you traitorous snake." There was silence from Kabuto as he entered the incubation chamber. Kabuto entered the incubation chamber without saying anything. There was his child, sleeping like it was no worries in the world. Her body remained motionless, her eyes closed. The little ups and downs in her chest were the only signs that she was still alive. Kabuto gazed at the infant girl indifferently. Her conception was enjoyable, but she remained only an experiment to him. Nevertheless, his master gave him strict orders. He will see it through to the very end even though he does not like it. Kabuto hastily removed the child from the room as a result, taking care to remove any surveillance equipment. But even his vigilant eyes had failed to notice the little garden snake that was perched in the corner, its yellow, serpentine eyes taking in everything that had happened. How much time has passed since she was imprisoned inside that place? How much time has passed since she last saw the daylight? As Hyuga Hanako looked around the now familiar surroundings, she wondered about these issues. She went over the daily ritual of saying the number in her mind, recalling the one from the day before. 302. Indicated that she had been detained for nearly a full year. It also meant that her daughter's birthday fell on that day. The matriarch of Hyuga slowly scanned the room once more, briefly focusing on Ume, who was unconscious, beside her. Since her imprisonment, she had been cursing the fact that there was no way out. But now, instead of just being angry, she was furious. She was unable to spend any time with her daughter on her birthday. She was bound by those chakras and could do nothing in this cell. It had been nearly a full year already, a year filled with sorrow. Hanako, who was unaware of what was going on at the time, could still recall the screams from the previous day. It wasn't until now, on the following day, that she received the information. The Byakugan of Hikari, whom she had considered as valuable as her own daughter, was violently removed from her skull. Her screams reverberated throughout the compound before the intense pain and the loss of many nerve cells ultimately claimed her life. And as if murdering Hikari in such a savage way wasn't enough, Orochimaru proceeded to rip out young Uzumaki's eyes. But contrary to what she had assumed, Orochimaru gave him Hikari's eyes by implanting them in him. Thus, in a depraved demonstration of his insatiable curiosity, Orochimaru had murdered a close friend and left the other permanently damaged. The matriarch of Hyuga shifted her gaze to the side and fell upon a silent Ume. Ever since the news was delivered by that miserable Kabuto child, she had remained silent. That abomination had not only caused Hikari to become crippled, but he had also torn the Byakugan from her form when she was still conscious. He was despised by Hanako. He was even more hated by her than Orochimaru. How could he hurt her loved ones like that? How could he, as he strutted and gloated like a rooster, fill Hikari with misery and pain? With a gentle exhale, Hanako emerged from her introspection. She cast a sidelong glance and saw that Yume's shoulders were slightly sagging with fatigue. She was certainly very tired. Her experience from the day before was probably very taxing. She required her sleep. Hanako. Sama. Ume said in a quiet, hollow voice inside the dark cell. What are we going to do? To be honest, Hanako was unaware. How would they proceed? Her constant search had been for a chance, an opportunity to break them out of this terrible prison. Despite being in captivity for almost a year, she had not discovered any security lapses or vulnerabilities that she could have taken advantage of. She looked around the cell so many times she could probably count how many bricks were on the walls. That was how hopeless it was. Naturally, though, she can't display it. She could only imagine what would happen to Ume, who had become so incredibly insecure since they had been captured, if she were to give up. She then gave a gentle shake of her head and spoke in a composed manner. We wait for our chance. They cannot be so diligent forever. When the time comes and they become more relaxed, we will strike and escape. That is the best bet that we have for now. Granted, they both knew that it was really just a way to appease her. However, Ume nodded and smiled a little. And when the time comes, she said, her eyes narrowing and her voice growing harsher. We will take our revenge for what they did to Hikari, Nisan. Though her eyes narrowed at the thought of killing that abomination, Hanako remained silent. Talking about that monstrosity. Oh, what's this? The two of you aren't as quiet today. What a pleasant surprise. Hanako and Ume tensed up as well. That voice. They turned their focus to the cells, where, sure enough, an emotionless Kabuto was observing the two of them with vacant eyes. Ume growled, "You," with bitter rage and contempt, tensing up against the restraints that held her. Her ki was evident in the air, and her eyes were wide and flaring with her dujutsu. "You monster! How dare you show your face to us? How dare you face us after what you did to Hikari, Nisan?" Yume's outburst only seemed to have made him laugh, if anything. Kabuto took a haughty stance and shook his head. In a condescending manner, he said, "You wouldn't understand. You cannot understand the joy of furthering our kind. If there are some who are needed as sacrifice for the many, then I would gladly sacrifice them to benefit the many." At that moment, Hanako saw two things. But enough of this. I did not come here to speak with an undisciplined little girl. First, he was holding a wrapped bundle. She felt as though she knew what that was, even though it was hidden. 2. There was a cloaked figure behind him who was unconscious. Hanako focused her gaze on the smaller figure, attempting to identify it. The hood did a great job of hiding everything, so she didn't see the face, but Kabuto moved, just enough to make the figure move, and 3 distinct whisker marks appeared on either side of his cheek. Her gaze grew wide. It was Naruto Uzumaki. And he had a horrible appearance. Upon noticing Hanako's stare, Kabuto grinned and slightly lifted his hood to reveal his face. When Hanako saw it, she was filled with horror. Naruto's face was gaunt, suggesting malnourishment, and pale, probably from the trauma he had endured. His mouth was open, a sign that he was not feeling well at all. Hanako raised her head a little and saw that thick bandages covered his eyes, or rather, covered where they should have been. A red trail of blood ran through Hanako's heavily bandaged eyes, and his eyes widened in horror at what he saw. Hanako heard Kabuto's icy voice say, "Disappointing, really." When he felt her ki spike up, he did not recoil in the slightest. Instead, he carried on with that tone of voice, behaving as though he was tired of the child entirely. "We had hoped that the demon's chakra would have began to accept and reconnect the nerves of her eyes. But rather, the opposite occurred. The demon is downright rejecting the eyes, thus causing pain both to the boy and possible disruption to the eyes that we had worked hard to harvest." Kabuto grinned at the intended effect. No matter, he was the first. I'm sure that Orochimaru-sama will be able to procure a few more experiments here and there. Wondering what he could have meant by those words, both Hyugas tensed. Did he mean to use the two of them, abduct more Hyugas, or use Hikari's child for experiments? The cell door opened before either of them could reply or say anything. Hanako stiffened, readying her entire body to strike out at him. However, Kabuto's sly smile suggested that he already anticipated their behavior. He covered his mouth and nose with a mask before pulling out a sprayer filled with an odd red liquid. The two Hyugas were covered in a fine mist that was created by Kabuto spraying the liquid into the cell before Hanako could say, "Forgive me for being hasty, but my master wanted you two out post-haste." Hanako was unable to cover her mouth or nose due to her shackled limbs. Breathing in deeply only made the inevitable take longer. She and Ume were soon forced to breathe, and they both felt unconsciousness creep in. The last thing Hanako saw before collapsing was Yakushi Kabuto's sly expression. Hyuga Hiyashi showed no signs of irritation other than narrowed eyes. People were arguing everywhere. Warm words were flying around the room more quickly than kunais hurled with chakras. This was not how it was supposed to be. The Hokage had called the council together to talk about the financial predicament they had unintentionally put Suna in. The Wind Daimyo ruling Sanagakure's domain had grown increasingly prepared to compensate foreign shinobi for their services, particularly those from Konoha. As a result, Suna entered a depression and needed less money to maintain a large portion of its military. To make matters worse, the Wind Daimyo even cut his already meager financial support for the village, which further reduced the size of the military. This, of course, sparked a wave of protests, and Sanagakure delegates traveled to Konoha to voice their displeasure with their ongoing business dealings with the daimyo and to request that they refuse certain requests. This, of course, prompted the Hokage to convene and decide what would happen to Suna's economy. The divided council, consisting of both civilians and shinobi veterans, immediately expressed their divergent opinions. The shinobi side, many of whom had fought in the Third Shinobi War, expressed their condolences to Suna right away and demanded that the Wind Daimyo's request be denied without delay. They said that since Fire Country had at least 3 times the military might of Suna, the daimyo, who was only a local lord and thus a subordinate of the Wind Lord, would have to swallow any kind of resentment. They believed that there would be almost no consequences for their actions. Quite the contrary. Relationships between the two villages will undoubtedly improve once Suna's Wind Daimyo starts contributing more money to their shinobi village. Naturally, the civilian side did not approve of their decision in the slightest. The civilian side, which was primarily composed of representatives and businessmen, contended that Konoha would benefit from continuing to do business with the local daimyo in Suna. They made the point that although the daimyo would have to accept any insult, it did not follow that he would go back to conducting business with the shinobi in his village right away. Instead, Suna's daimyo might decide to move his company to a different village, such as Iwa or Kumo, which have strained ties with Konoha. They therefore believed that, should Konoha really reject the business, Suna's daimyo would just do business somewhere else, resulting in strained relations with Suna, who would probably accuse them of just refocusing their attention elsewhere. If Iwa, Kumo, or even both choose to team up with Suna to oppose Konoha, that would be a setback for Konoha. The two sides started quarreling. Subsequently, disputes intensified as multiple disagreeable remarks started reverberating throughout the space. Arguments soon descended into full-fledged yelling as each side tried to verbally pound their point home. Hiyashi maintained his signature expression of indifference throughout this entire ordeal. However, he was also starting to sense traces of irritation tucked away inside of him. And how is he not able to? It had taken the council almost 2 hours of non-stop verbal sparring to come to a decision. Hiyashi looked to Sandaime Hokage, who was occupying the top seat and looking out over the yelling in a laid-back, tired manner. He would pinch the bridge of his nose every now and then, sigh, and take a long drag on his pipe. In moments like these, Hiyashi questioned why Sandaime had permitted civilians to serve on the council ever since the Third Shinobi War ended. It was true that the village had benefited economically from the civilians' decisions in some areas, making them more powerful. However, in other areas, the civilians' decisions had left them completely ignorant, making them inept in areas that should have been simple to think through. Because the council always needs a 2/3 majority to vote, the civilian half's ineptitude had prevented the council from operating at its customary level of effectiveness. Actually, since the civilian implementation, the council's efficiency had dropped to an all-time low, save for Yondaime's brief tenure as leader. This wasn't always the case. Hiyashi's grandfather told him that all of the current and retired shinobi on the council were conspiring under the leadership of Nidaime, Sama and Shodai. Sama. Even though there was not much economic growth in those years, the council of that era completed decisions with remarkable efficiency. They were always able to come to a decision quickly and, most of the time, it was the best option available. Decision making has now stagnated due to the civilian side of the council's relative incompetence. The Hokage, a representation of Konoha's authority, did nothing to stop the increasing frequency of arguments. Hiyashi suspected that the Hokage's resistance to taking appropriate action stems from a combination of fatigue and reluctance. Yondaime Sama, his successor, ruled for almost 4 years while Sandaime Sama relished his retirement. But Yondaime Sama's death left him with no choice but to assume the leadership role again, and worse, in Konoha's gloomy state. Many of their shinobi had been killed by the Kyuubi, many families had lost loved ones, and many had lost hope and dreams for the future. The Hokage had become less strict and more lenient, probably due to his extreme reluctance to take on the role once more. He surrendered more and more power to the opposing civilians, who seized it with avarice. They took advantage of Sandaime's advancing years and her lack of desire to fight, seizing control and acting solely in their own best interests rather than the good of the village as a whole. Coolly, Hiyashi's 2 icy eyes narrowed and looked at the Hokage with a decided hardness. If current trends continue, there will be yet another catastrophe that brings with it unimaginable grief and despair. But this time, the cause will be Konoha's own government and the extent of its corruption. Old Sarutobi needs to be reminded that holding the position of leadership is a serious responsibility. Someone has to remind the elderly monkey of his responsibilities and reiterate what it means to be a Hokage. Hiyashi has already planned how to accomplish it. It appeared, though, that it would have to wait until later. Suddenly, the council room door exploded open, ending any arguments that were taking place. Now, every member of the council, especially Hiyashi, was focused solely on the young member of the Hyuga branch, who was gasping for air after having probably fled to a more distant area. They waited silently for him to gather himself, and as soon as he did, he turned to face Hiyashi with a look of pure confusion. Hiyashi. Sama. It's Hanako. Sama and Ume. Sama. They've been discovered at the eastern gates. The branch member's cry was met with complete silence as everyone focused their attention on the clan leader. Hiyashi's usually expressionless face was full of shock. Was it really feasible? His adored wife Hanako was animate? A thick cloud of ki suddenly enveloped the council room, making many shudder. Hiyashi's eyes narrowed. I hope this is not some joke. If it is, then you will find the consequences to be most dire. I wouldn't be joking about this Hiyashi. Sama, it was indeed Hanako. Sama and Ume. Sama, though. They were unconscious and had two other people with them. Who were they? The branch employee hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the details. However, Hiyashi's little increase in ki more than compensated for the choice. The branch member instantly bowed his head at Hiyashi's indignant expression. Sir. One of them was Uzumaki Naruto yet. He was heavily wounded. When I swept my Byakugan over to make sure that it was him, I noticed that the heavy bandages wrapped over his eyes hid a startling secret. Uzumaki appears to have the Byakugan, though the nerves are not yet connected. I can only guess as to where he may have received them. And the other person? Sir. The other person was an infant. She. By the looks of it, she may only be about 2 days old. I also swept through her with the Byakugan, and found that she also has it. I see. Hiyashi approached the silent Sarutobi as he slowly got to his feet. Hokage. Sama. I believe this takes top priority over this meeting, if you would excuse me. With a shushin, Sarutobi's nod indicated that it was necessary, and the branch member quickly followed Hiyashi's formed disappearance. The council was left stunned and dumbfounded in their wake, not knowing whether to continue where they had left off or to adjourn the meeting. Hinata sensed, for some reason, that this was not her day. She could not muster the same level of energy as usual, even though she carried on with the daily routine as usual. It was odd, but today she just did not have the strength. It seemed like she had lost all of her energy or had chosen to keep quiet and bide her time. But she just did not know for what. Of course, it could just be the droning that has occurred on this specific day. It was undoubtedly one of the hottest days of the year with oppressive heat outside. The academy's lack of air conditioning contributed to the uncomfortable and hot classroom conditions. Unfortunately, Uruka Sensei's lectures were also contributing significantly to the classroom's growing monotony. Hinata took great pride in her willingness to learn and her constant attention to the lessons of her past. She had always found it fascinating, particularly when it came to Tsunade, the Sannin who contributed to the current level of effectiveness of Konoha's medic ninjas. However, even she was overwhelmed by the combination of the heat, humidity, and Uruka's lectures. As a result, she discovered that she was nodding off in class with the others. And before long, her wandering thoughts turned to the blonde boy who had abruptly vanished from her existence. She had never understood why so many people had spoken hatefully about Uzumaki Naruto. Nevertheless, he would always laugh it off, displaying his cheery smile and carefree nature, regardless of what everyone thought of him or the numerous whispers that went unspoken behind his back. Probably his easygoing demeanor and infectious smile were what drew her in so deeply. Witnessing someone who could dismiss his peers with the same eagerness as a tag champion had taken her by surprise. Her initial surprise quickly gave way to admiration when she discovered that there was opposition to him everywhere, even among the academy's teachers. He represented what she yearned for but was unable to become. She found it intriguing that he was the complete opposite of her. It wasn't until recently, after his extended absence, that Hinata bothered to review his previous deeds and his behavior before those who had disparaged him. And it became clear quickly. When Naruto chose to ignore the icy stares and whispers, he was always forcing himself. The smile that she had always found admirable had appeared extremely strained on his face. His windows to the soul, his bright blue eyes, would always be closed off to the outside world, as though he could not bear to see it. Finally, there was something strange about his declaration that he was going to become a Hokage, as if he didn't even think he was saying it himself. She recognized all of these right away and came to the conclusion. Naruto's demeanor in front of those people, including his smile and his seeming indifference, were all cleverly designed masks meant to deceive others about his true emotions. And she had been taken in by it, head over heels. Hinata discovered that when he had shown her the little hiding place she now claimed as her sanctuary, that was the only time his smile had actually seemed natural and so much more beautiful to behold. His smile then was like the sun in its warmth, and now, in comparison to his other public smiles, she discovered that the warmth never existed despite his cheery mask. What really scared her was not realizing this. No, the thing that truly alarmed her was how Naruto was truly feeling. He must have made a concerted effort to ignore the comments made about him based on the way he had behaved and the strain in his actions. That could only indicate that he was experiencing internal pain to an extent beyond her comprehension. However, it was evident that Naruto did not want them to be satisfied with him when he was in that state, so over time, he painstakingly created a mask that got better and better at concealing his true emotions. After Hinata realized that, she felt awful. She was ignorant of Naruto's true feelings not only because her Byakugan, the illustrious, all seeing lineage of her clan, was unable to even catch a glimpse of what he was really feeling. She felt profoundly useless after learning that Naruto's mask could not be broken despite her bloodline being praised for being the most perceptive and intuitive. Alternatively put, another way to show how weak she really is to say that she just lacked the strength in her Byakugan to be able to see it. Yes, she had initially denied it, questioning why her father and the majority of the clan had started to refer to her as weak or act extremely cold toward her. Then she discovered that she had lost the will to resist their denigration as the days grew into months and the months quickly approached a year. Eventually, she found herself bowing her head and accepting their teasing and mockery. She was powerless to stop it, even though it was embarrassing, she was that helpless. Hyuga Hinata. With a start, the young heiress snapped out of her gloomy reverie and turned back to the front of the class. Standing beside him was a member of the Hyuga branch who was keeping his pupilless eyes fixed only on her, while Iruka Sensei stood there observing her with worried eyes. The young heiress, perplexed, got up from her seat and started to descend the stairs, wondering how she could have been called upon. As soon as she got to her feet, the branch member led her out of the classroom with a hand on her shoulder. Hinata paused and cast a sidelong glance at Iruka Sensei. But all the scarred man could do was nod, as if to say she was welcome to go. Thus, Hinata allowed herself to be led from the room and the academy without resistance. Hinata wondered what might have happened as they were leaving the academy. Since guiding her out, the branch member had said nothing at all, not even speculating as to what might have occurred. She didn't understand. How come they would lead her outside but keep her in the dark? Anyo. Hinata winced at the softness of her voice, something that Hyugas disapprove of. The way the branch member turned a cool eye toward her and pursed his lips made this clear. What has happened? The branch member didn't say anything for a while, giving Hinata the impression that he was just choosing to ignore her inquiry. Just as she was ready to put her head back down and accept that she didn't know anything, he interrupted her with a sharp tone. A patrol team had discovered 4 unconscious people outside Konoha, near the outskirts of our forests. 2 of them were identified as Hyuga Ume Sama and Hyuga Hinako Sama. One was an unknown Hyuga infant and the other. The branch member said, hesitating for a moment before deciding not to say anything. Was Uzumaki Naruto. Hinata's shocked eyes grew wide. Her mom. Was she still alive? Moreover, Naruto-kun was in her company? How could this have happened? As soon as she realized they were headed to the hospital, the young heiress turned back to the road. Her mind was full of questions, and she was looking for answers, but there was an undeniable joy over all of them. The pair that had embraced her like the sun, the pair that departed in what seemed like an unending dusk, had returned. As he returned to Orochimaru's hiding place, Kabuto remained silent. He showed zero consideration and indifference towards his actions. Nothing revealed in his heart, nothing broke through his barriers. Ultimately, why ought they to? The people he had saved were merely subjects for experimentation. Moreover, his master gave him strict orders, and one of those orders was to save them. So where was he going to lodge his complaint? Rather, after lugging 4 people around, Kabuto felt like giving himself a pat on the back for being able to leave the hideout so discreetly. Moreover, he felt like rewarding himself for successfully hiding his whereabouts from the patrolling teams that had discovered his talent. Kabuto couldn't help but wonder why his master was trying to thwart Orochimaru's plans as he slipped back through the stone walls that led to Orochimaru's village. Of course, Orochimaru remained a member of the group called Akatsuki. He was actually there 3 days ago to assist with the sealing of the beast with 4 tails. Of course Orochimaru had goals and was using the organization to achieve them, but weren't those goals shared by the other members as well? Since it was obvious that every other member of Akatsuki was only there to serve their own interests, what would Sama stand to gain by interfering with Orochimaru's plans? Kabuto stopped in front of his research room, but he was at a loss for words. He opened the door, hoping for a restful night's sleep, and sighed, suddenly feeling quite tired. Unfortunately, the force of the killing intent that started suddenly hammering into his skull stopped him in his tracks. Kabuto let out a gasp and dropped to his knees, his body trembling and beads of sweat dripping from it. His pulse quickened and his senses became acute, causing his eyes to bulge and his veins to pound with adrenaline. His survival instincts kicked in almost immediately, growling at the intruder. Someone is present in the space. He possesses great strength. Hurry. However, Kabuto discovered he was unable to run. The sheer force of the killing intent surrounding him locked his limbs, and to be honest, he was having difficulty breathing at all. It really was that bad. Kukakukuku. Well. So you've finally shown your true colors, Kabuto-kun. With deliberate slowness, the young medic turned his head to face his room and saw Orochimaru's shadowy figure seated in his chair, his yellow serpentine eyes flashing like lanterns at night. His chakra was gushing out in frigid waves, his smile was maniacal, and his form was just radiating his desire to kill. I should have known that when I accepted you into my ranks, that you were a little too skilled to have been a simply prodigy. Kukukukuku. But now, I know who you truly work for. Rising from his seat, Orochimaru approached the kneeling Kabuto, who was staring up at him as though he was offering an apology for his serious transgressions. Orochimaru's hand shot up and grabbed onto the medic's head, squeezing it like a melon. His face broke out in a smile full of insanity and hatred. Trust that pitiful doll to concoct something like this. Kukukukuku, but no matter, I still have use for you, and whether you like it or not, I will be the one whom you call master, now. And Orochimaru's glaring yellow eyes and his deafening laugh, which reverberated throughout the complex, were the last things Kabuto saw and heard before his vision faded. Unusually for someone who had grown accustomed to the dark and stale air, it was bright outside and the air felt fresh and clean. Hanako's eyes fluttered as she experienced irritation from her now sensitive eyes to light. Wherever. What happened to her? Her bed was by the window, and sunlight streamed in from the windows, bathing her white sheets in an almost ethereal glowing light. The room was not brightly lit, probably to help people feel less irritated. Ah. What took place? My memory ended with witnessing Kabuto's grin and... Kabuto. Hanako's eyes snapped open, and she looked around her right away. Where was she? Was she in another camp of the enemy? If that's the case, why do they treat her so well? Why was she recuperating in this particular room? Hoping to find a clue that would pinpoint her exact location, Hanako looked around the room. The smell of disinfectants permeated the hospital room, which was odd because hospitals should all smell like this. Next. How could she be anywhere? Hanako had the urge to stand up and see if she could spot a familiar sight in any way. However, there was hardly any difference between this hospital room and the numerous others that were visible. Byakugan. Hanako's active dujutsu caused her eyes to flare, and her veins began to bulge from the increased blood flow. The matriarch of Hyuga winced almost instantly and turned her eyes off. Her senses were invaded almost immediately by a pain that slowly subsided and left her with an odd numb feeling on her temple. What had taken place? When she used her dujutsu, why did her head instantly erupt in pain? To try and deflect some of the blows to her head, Hanako shook her head. Hyuga. Sama. You're awake. Hanako turned to face the voice, and she saw a somewhat shocked looking nurse. The nurse bustled over some of the medical equipment arranged there and quickly bowed before approaching her. That was strange. Why would a foe handle her with such tenderness? Unless... The mother winced inwardly at how weak her voice sounded and said, "Wait." Her voice, which was already incredibly soft, became barely audible. "Where is this place?" The nurse bowed slightly in acknowledgement. "Oh, that's right. You were unconscious when we found you at the outskirts of the forest. You're back home, Hyuga. Sama. This is Konohagakure no Sato." This. Was she at home? Hanako tried to sit up, but she winced. Her whole body ached for some reason. Every muscle chafed under her movements. It seems that the nurse supported her muscles because Hanako was fussed over once more a moment later. "You mustn't overextend yourself, Hyuga. Sama. Your reports stated that nearly all your tendons and muscles upon your limbs were slit by a chakra scalpel. While we were able to heal it, it will still take time for your body to be able to heal the rest itself." Hanako could hardly believe. This is the village. Was she back at home? How could that have happened? How on earth did Kabuto let them go? Hold on. Them? The abrupt tone Hanako adopted made the nurse jump. What about the others? She sounded agitated and desperate. And with good cause. She was curious about the safety of everyone else she had seen with her. Calm down, Hyuga. Sama. Hyuga Ume. Sama and the unknown Hyuga are right now merely resting. As for Uzumaki, well, he is resting, but there is some concern over what certain experiments had done to his mind. He is right now under a dreamless genjutsu. She felt anxious now. While Hanako was relieved that Ume and Hikari's child were both safe, she was worried about little Naruto's unidentified health. Who knows how much of a pain he was really in? But at least he's out of the serpent's hideout and in Konoha's protection now. Anyo. Hyuga. Sama. The mother looked back at the nurse, who was a little fidgety, and said, She was appreciative of the nurse's patience as she waited for her to regain her composure. Anyo. Hyuga Hiyashi. Sama is currently waiting outside. would you like to see him? Hanako's gaze expanded. Hello, Hiyashi. Sama. Was Hiyashi Sama present? Hanako experienced a sudden overwhelming sense of longing. How long had it been since she last saw the face of her dear husband? How long has it been since she last experienced the serenity of his presence and the warmth of his touch? Too long, she thought. She wasn't going to waste any more of the time that he had been away from her for far too long. Yes, was her quiet reply. Please bring him in. The nurse approached the edge of the door and bowed to her. She opened it, nodded to whoever was waiting, and turned to leave. As the person entered slowly and met her husband Hyuga Hiyashi's gaze, Hanako felt tears well up in her eyes. Hiyashi. Sama. She said with a weeping smile on her face as her eyes began to well up with tears. I missed you. Hiyashi's usually emotionless exterior cracked as relief washed over him, saying, I missed you as well. Without thinking about who was looking, he approached his long-lost wife and gave her an embrace. I missed you so much. She closed her eyes and savored the warmth he emanated. It ought to be like this. She made up her mind. To be able to sense his love, warmth, and presence. It resembled a bright spot at the end of a pitch black tunnel. Hiyashi. Sama. Shish. Hiyashi whispered to her while giving her a gentle pat on the back. It's fine now. You're home. Household. At that, Hanako smiled a little. Home sounded wonderful to her after almost a year apart. Gradually, she lowered her head even further into his hug. She was curious to find out if this was a real dream or a hallucination. She desired for this to be real. Mother. Hanako tensed up almost instantly. When was the last time she heard that quiet voice? Too long, by far. Gradually, she turned her back on her husband and saw her daughter Hyuga Hinata, who had big eyes. Oh, I see. She'd come a long way in the last 9 months. She appeared to have gained some height, changed her wardrobe, and appeared more reserved overall. She missed her so much. Slowly, Hanako withdrew from Hiyashi's embrace, failing to notice that he had tensed up the moment Hinata arrived. Hinata. She was in disbelief. In the 9 months that she had been apart, her little daughter had changed so much. It was really peculiar. She was still her daughter, though, and she would always love her for herself. She smiled and extended her arms. Come here, little Hinata. Hinata's pale lavender eyes flashed with recognition, but she hesitated to move over, which perplexed Hanako. She then observed that occasionally, Hinata would stop fidgeting and shift her attention from her to Hiyashi. She would instantly look down again and start to fidget. Hanako was not a stupid person, mind you. She is actually among the more knowledgeable people in the field of medical research. As a result, she was able to spot her daughter's abuse and neglect at an early age, especially when it was so evident. That implied that her husband was at least partially to blame, as did the fact that she continued to avoid looking directly at Hiyashi. And that was enough to make her tense up. Suddenly, the warmth and love she had for her husband grew cold and hard. Her husband, who refused to meet her gaze, was the object of her narrowed eyes as she looked from her terrified daughter. Hinata. The young child said, looking up to hear her mother call her name. Please go outside for a moment. I would like to have a talk with your father. Ah. Hinata nodded slightly and shot another quick glance at her father, who was still avoiding eye contact. Yes, mother. With a slow motion, Hinata shut the door and turned to leave. She was still a little shocked by the recent revelation. Her mom was still living. She was not as dead as she had been made to feel. However, along with the good news there was also a more sinister query. In the last 9 months, where had her mother been? Why had she vanished out of nowhere? What's more, why was her disappearance connected to Naruto's? Naruto. Hinata came to a sudden stop. When she became aware of what had transpired, her eyes widened in shock. She'd forgotten all about Naruto in her concern and confusion over her mother's return. She started moving quickly to the receptionist's office, feeling a new sense of urgency. The charge nurse glanced up, gave Hinata a quick glance, and then nodded her head back. Hyuga Hanako and Hyuga Ume are in that area. If you are looking for them, I'll simply call their room and ask them for permission. Is that all right? Anyo. Hinata noticed her incredibly restless fidgeting. She had almost completely lost the resolve she had developed when she saw the nurse's shocked expression. At that moment, she wished a hole in the ground would just pop up and she could fall in because she was so embarrassed. She desired to see Naruto once more, though, so she spoke again, but in a hushed tone. It's just that I want to see you Uzumaki Naruto. She prayed in her head that the nurse would accept that and closed her eyes. Moments went by, and Hinata's nervousness intensified. At last, she opened her eyes slowly and wondered why the nurse was not saying anything. She was surprised to see that the nurse had not even heard her, but was just going through several files. Hinata's face turned beet red, her embarrassment escalating. Anyo. Ah, here it is. The nurse exclaimed, smiling with relief as she took a portfolio out of a sizable stack. She took a moment to look through it, then her finger stopped on a name. The nurse looked up and became confused at the sight of the little Hyuga girl looking so agitated. Uzumaki Naruto is at room 304. Simply take the stairs up and it'll be the first room on the right. Was there a problem? Hinata, meantime, was scolding herself in her head. What kind of fool could she have been? The nurse was just doing what she asked, which was to find his location. However, she believed that her remarks were ignored and were about to annoy her even more. Oh, I see. How could she have had such poor vision? Anyo. Little miss. Hinata exclaimed, snapping back to the nurse in front of her, who had abruptly leaned forward in her chair and touched her forehead. Do you need to have treatment as well? Your face is quite red and warm. Hinata's embarrassed blush, if anything, got redder. She gave the nurse a quick nod, mumbled a quiet thank you, and quickly turned to leave. Oh, I see. She was really embarrassed. Though Hinata was heading up the stairs to Naruto's room, she couldn't help but wonder what she ought to say. How could she respond? She hadn't seen him in nearly a year, and even then, he had been hiding his melancholy behind that joyful, carefree facade. When she sees him, would he hide behind it once more? Could she find the strength to assist him? Since her revelation, Hinata had yearned for Naruto's return more than anything. She wanted to be able to hug him and reassure him that it's acceptable to cry and to not hide behind that mask. She wanted more than anything to reassure him that he wasn't alone and that she would be there for him. When Hinata finally came to a stop in front of Naruto's door, she hesitated for a short while. Though she was terrified, she knew exactly what to say to him. She had no idea if he would take offense at her being able to see the mask, which, as far as she could tell, very few people had been able to look through. She inhaled deeply and slowly, closing her eyes and strengthening her determination to see him once more. With her heart fixed, Hinata let go of her breath and carefully opened the door. And encountered complete silence. Whatever words she was ready to say to support him had died in her throat at once. All Hinata could do was observe. Utter horror at what she saw in front of her. She had seen a different Naruto those many months ago. This was not the same person. The young blonde was lying in a big white bed, seemingly asleep. However, those snow-white sheets were tainted by elaborate seals that extended to the ceiling. There were machines positioned all around with tubes that appeared to protrude into his hidden body along those seals. At last, his eyes were concealed by heavy, white bandages. However, even the thickness gave way to the red stain in the thin lines and two large red spots. Hinata was appalled by what she saw. His eyes appeared to be continuously weeping blood. With great care to avoid stepping on any of the seals, Hinata approached the unconscious blonde slowly. Upon arriving at his bedside, she took a quick look at the vacant chair in front of her. She took it without a second's hesitation and now found herself facing his blind self. Naruto-kun. Hinata expressed sadness. In what other way was she not? Naruto appeared extremely unhappy in this location. It was as though there was a aura of someone's agony permeating the very air. Nevertheless, he had returned. He was back, at least temporarily. It's been almost a year now, Naruto-kun. Do you remember me, Hinata? She assumed she could not expect a response, but there was none. So much has happened in the 9 months that you've been gone. I found that mother had disappeared along with Hikari, Nisan and Ume. Nisan. No one would tell me what happened but told me to never think about them again. I eventually joined the academy. Everyone is so scary. And also there are some that make me mad. Hinata suddenly cracked a smile. I'm sorry. I suppose I cannot mouth anyone right now when they aren't here. It's rude, is it not? Naruto-kun. Do you remember when we first met? I was made of by some girls and ran away, crying. I wanted to be alone, to be by myself. Then you came. Your smile was so bright that I was surprised to see it. I wondered then, why would someone I don't know suddenly come out of nowhere and talk to me? Naruto-kun. You were my first real friend. I'm so sorry. Back then, you comforted me, yet I didn't know that you yourself was just like me. Hinata softly hiccups as tears well up gaze. In an attempt to hide her tears from him, she quickly covered her eyes with both hands. It's okay, Naruto-kun. I'll try harder now. You don't have to be alone anymore. And for a while it remained that way. Hinata would merely speak briefly each time, but then there would be silence. She would just stare at Naruto's face during this silent moment, emotionless and almost completely devoid of features due to the thick bandages. She wanted to cling to him, but she was always afraid that her touch would trigger something, so she just stayed there, watching him and hoping he would get better. At last, the door opened and a medic entered, following what seemed like an eternity in their own world. As soon as Hinata saw the medic, she got to her feet and apologized softly. She quickly left, not even bothering to explain herself, her face flushed red with embarrassment and a less complex range of emotions. The medic shook his head and watched her bolt. He whispered, "Kids." With a swift hand gesture, he turned back to face the unconscious blonde and said, "Well, nothing I can do about that, I suppose. Now, let's see." Before long, his hand was glowing a bright green as he examined the boy for diagnostic purposes. The medic stopped, his glowing hand hovering over the big bandages, saying, "Body wounds are healing at expected rapid pace. Genjutsu effect still in place. Chakra coils are performing normally. Wait. What's this?" When he saw what the medical sonar had picked up, his eyes widened with surprise. He quickly tapped the earpiece and spoke. "Get Hokage Sama in here, now." The Konohagakure Sandame Hokage, old Sarutobi, could not help but gaze at the physician. The things he'd just heard, are they even feasible? Please repeat what you said. Sir. Uzumaki Naruto's eyes were torn off of his body, that much is true. It is also true that the Byakugan of Hyuga Hikari had been implanted in its place, yet from what we had gathered when we first performed the diagnostic, his body had been rejecting the Byakugan. That would have explained the deterioration of the eyes. It also would have explained the inflammatory response and the blood that kept leaking out. Yet now, after performing the diagnostic again, I found that the Byakugan is actually completely transformed. And this is the cause of the Kyuubi's Yoki? That can a reason, though the effects of the Shiki fusion may have been acting on it too. The chakra that the Yondaime left behind in the seal had seeped a little into the eye sockets as well. From what I was able to glean, the Byakugan had been constantly deteriorating under the effect of the combined chakras. Then, the Kyuubi's Yoki began to rebuild the eyes. By the time I checked, the nerves that connected the eyes and to the brain had already been healed and connected. Sarutobi remained quiet as he considered the details in his mind. Thus, Naruto's eyes had now turned into his. This would actually be very beneficial to the boy. Sarutobi was certain that it would come in handy for his protection later on. But what were the repercussions? He had no way of knowing, but the boy's mind might have been affected by the Kyuubi's Yoki's influence on the nerve connections. Then, what would happen to him? What are the chances that the Kyuubi's Yoki would be able to affect Naruto's mentality? The doctor gradually closed his eyes and examined Naruto's body in greater detail. He positioned one luminous hand over the seal that was placed across the boy's navel. Above Naruto's head, the other one hovered. The medic stood motionless for several minutes while the details gradually became clear. He eventually calmed down and gave the Hokage a shake of his head. "It is all right. The seal is still functioning properly. The barest minimum is being filtered out and in turn, purified for Naruto's own use." Sarutobi let out a relieved sigh. Therefore, the last tactic used by his successor continues to be effective. That's excellent. He did not have to worry too much about the Kyuubi breaking the seal, at the very least. Naruto already endured enough suffering without the fox demon consuming his soul. And if all goes well, the villagers won't have any more motivation to attack him, Sarutobi said, shaking his head to get the gloomy ideas out of his mind. He turned back to face the medic, nodding at him as he headed toward the door. The medic bowed respectfully to Sarutobi as the elderly man departed, saying, "Please keep a careful watch over Naruto-kun." The door closed silently, and neither the faint glow of the Genjutsu seal nor the twitch of Naruto's finger were visible. During his tenure as the Hokage, Sarutobi considered the establishment of this medical facility to be one of his greatest achievements. His village had lost so much in those days when fighting was as commonplace as drinking water. The village was sending its children into battle despite its large population, and most of the time, many bright futures were destroyed in an instant. Tsunade, a former student of Shodai, Sama and his granddaughter, was among those who had suffered the loss of a loved one. She did, however, use that loss to further her passion for recovery. To this extent, she established Konoha's medical center using her own funds that she had both earned and inherited. She had imposed severe rules and regulations in it. It was said to be such a demanding training program that only those with the mental fortitude of a seasoned Chunin were expected to make it through. However, the outcomes were outstanding. From Tsunade's initial selection of students, tens of medic Nins were produced, all possessing discipline that even surpassed that of Anbu. Over the course of the warring years, medic Nins gained so much notoriety that the majority of medic.nin leaders were regarded as if they were Junins themselves. Even in these comparatively peaceful years, people who wished to follow the path of the shinobi but failed the genin exam frequently choose to become combat medics. In times of battle, medics were already granted authority and paid with chunins, and the leaders of the medics were regarded as the elite, or junins. Nevertheless, it wasn't the medic's abilities that filled him with pride. Even though it has saved countless lives, a medic's skill is useless without the compassion that is also required. Tsunade literally bashed into her former students here. She would occasionally even use genjutsu as a test to see if her pupils would refrain from healing anyone. Even if they possessed the necessary abilities, those who failed were banished right away and advised not to seek a career as a medic.nin ever again. Her students continue her legacy in this medical facility. They are now seasoned medical shinobis themselves. They literally beat out the prejudice of any applicant in the medical field by using intimidation, genjutsu, and other tactics akin to those of the interrogation squads. Despite Sarutobi's reservations about the methods employed with the applicants, he is unable to ignore the outcomes in front of him. Even enemies who are hurt are healed by the medics, including the local outcast. With a sigh, Sarutobi looked around him at the impressive complex that houses the best medical science and techniques ever developed. His deepest regret was that his student was not present to witness her original 7-person group of students grow into one of the most exceptional groups of medics, both in terms of skill and liberality. The old Hokage stopped in front of Hyuga Hanako's room, saying, he heard angry screams that he had not heard in a while coming from the voices in the room. Apparently, Hyuga Hanako was furious. Sweat trickled from Sarutobi's pore as he tipped his Hokage hat to conceal his unexpected look of fear. Maybe it's advisable to put this off until later. The adage, Makai hath no scorn like a woman's fury, had long since proven to be accurate for him, especially after witnessing Jiraiya, one of his other students, suffer numerous beatings after being discovered to be seeing women in bathhouses. Sarutobi undoubtedly recalled Hanako from her younger days. Perhaps it would be best to wait until she calms down. She shared her daughter's shyness. However, he could only hope that the person who provoked her fury would die quickly and without suffering, since when she gets angry, and he mean really angry, that person will die. She was really that terrifying. Was he just thinking, scary? Hearing Hyuga Hiyashi's voice coming from the door, Sarutobi leapt in surprise and said, Hokage Sama, is there something I can help you with? With a look of complete desperation in his eyes, he slowly turned to face the man who was regarded as the only one who could sit in a field of fire and still maintain an indifferent expression. N.Noi was just thinking of asking Hanako-chan a few things, but it would seem that at this moment, she is busy. So, I will take my leave. Sarutobi cursed the man in front of him and said, No, I'm sure that she will be eager to know what you would like to say. Hiyashi was grinning now. I'll at least let you have some of it too if I'm going to take that hell, was practically shouted by the gleam in his pale eyes. Oh, I must insist. Sarutobi hoped in private that Hiyashi would spare him too, as she pulled the elderly Hokage inside. He was greeted by a red-faced, deeply breathing Hyuga Hanako when he slowly opened his eyes. As soon as Hanako saw the Sandaime Hokage in the room, she tried her hardest to gather herself. However, Sarutobi was able to see the glare she directed directly at Hiyashi. This isn't over, you're getting it when I'm better, it stated quite clearly. All Hiyashi could do was slowly nod, clearly accepting his fate. Hokage Sama, is there something that you wanted from me? Sarutobi could not suppress a small laugh, even at himself. My. It has been a while since I've seen your face, Hanako-chan. Can't you let an old man have the luxury of seeing one of his beloved children again? Even though Hanako was frowning, the two men could see the tiny, content smile that had appeared on her face. There was a pause before Hanako whispered softly. Yes. I'm finally home again. Sarutobi gave up on trying to talk the matter over to the planned conversation, saying, and it is true, that I have not come just to see you. He'll just be blunt and direct. I want to know what has been done to Naruto-kun. Hanako was surprised and looked up. She couldn't blame him, but she hadn't anticipated him to need the answers so soon. If she had been Hokage, she too would have wanted to respond. I don't know everything that has been done to Naruto-kun. The only real experiment that I had laid eyes on had been Orochimaru's attempt to create a technique where a person can stay at a constantly young age. An immortal technique, if you will. From what I was able to see and hear, The technique had done the exact opposite, and by the time they had managed to draw it back, Naruto.kun had already aged by a whole year. I see. Knowing that was unsettling. If Orochimaru had found a way to accelerate aging, he could probably build an army the size of Fire Country's own samurai legions in a year, perhaps even less if he put in the necessary effort. Anyo. Hokage. Sama. Sarutobi quickly turned back to Hanako, who was now staring at him with determination evident in her features. Sarutobi experienced a surge of nostalgia. He had not seen Hanako with that look in her eyes for a very long time. Yes. What is it? Regarding the matter of Uzumaki Naruto, I would like to adopt him into the Hyuga clan. Where am I? Where am I? Where exactly am I? My body hurts. Ouch, chilly, so very cold. Where have I gone? Little one, wake up. You're still alive. Awaken. Who exactly are you? Awaken. Uzumaki Naruto's body began to move as he gradually stirred. He was instantly blinded by the fact that whatever was covering his eyes was wet with some kind of liquid. He also noticed a significant shift from his typical morning mood. He had no physical restraints. Odd. He never sensed a day going by in which that bastard Kabuto did not put a stop to him. Why was this particular day so special? Hold on, what had previously occurred? Yes, he did recall experiencing an unfathomable agony. Naruto slowly closed his hidden eyes, trying to pinpoint the exact memory that was causing his sockets to ache. Retrospective. They led him into a blood-filled room. Though he had seen these things before, the symbols of inhuman cruelty were so obvious that he felt like puking. He was thrown onto a bed and strapped down again in an instant. Naturally, he battled, but as usual, he was unable to achieve freedom. Kukukukuku, today we have a special treat for you, Naruto.kun. He looked up in the direction of that reptilian voice, which made him sick to his stomach, and met Orochimaru's yellow eyes. With a smile, the man with pale skin raised a jar. A set of pupilless eyes peered back at him from inside. With horror, Naruto felt his own eyes widen. Where, exactly, had he previously seen those? The sounds of a metal table being carted away made Naruto stiffen. He slowly turned to face the door, seeing Kabuto carrying a lifeless body away. Naruto barely had time to catch a glimpse of it, but it was sufficient. That individual, one of those more senior Sans he had previously seen, was motionless. Her expression was one of agony and anguish. Her eye sockets were bloody and empty. Naruto only managed to see Orochimaru in front of him, with a steel scalpel, before his world burst into red and pain. Kukukukuku, now don't worry, this won't hurt one bit. Finale flashback. Naruto exhaled as he clenched his fists around the sheets. The knowledge sickened him completely. He possessed her eyes. With deliberate slowness, Naruto lifted his hand to feel the firmly coiled bandages. To consider, there was someone else's eyes hidden beneath those bandages. Naruto clenched his teeth in bitterness and rage towards the man, saying, "It's all his fault. If he hadn't been there, this never would have happened." He jumped in surprise and said, "Yes. I suppose that it is indeed mostly that man's fault, isn't it?" It had not even occurred to Naruto to hear a footstep. His whole body stiffened, ready to flee wherever it would take him. Who are you?" "Oh. Just an old friend." Naruto could infer from the grizzled tone and the familiarity with which he spoke that whoever this person is, he is elderly and has probably known him before. Not that that really got under his skin. Naruto scowled and clenched his hands around his bandages, frustrated at his lack of vision and still feeling queasy about the eyes in his sockets not belonging to him. In any case, how was that possible? How is it that he can see with someone else's eyes just by replacing his own? Is he even able to see with these? Wait. He started to scratch at his bandages, quickly exhibiting signs of anxiety. Could he even see at all? What if he wasn't able to? Would they go ahead and rip off these eyes too, and put on a new pair? Apparently, the elderly man recognized his fear and anxiety quickly and told him to calm down. Naruto.kun, you need not worry about your eyes. The medics have told me that there will be no problem with your sight should you let them heal over time. Ignoring the man, Naruto quickly started removing the bandage after locating its end. He vigorously unwrapped his bandages, ignoring the stranger's protest in a stubborn manner. He needed to be aware. Would he see or would he not? Is he going to be blind? Would he appear even more freakish with his new eyes? At last, as the final bandage came off, he raised his hands and gently massaged his shut eyes. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty at that time. He was not sure if he would be blind or not, but what would he see if he could see? particularly through the eyes of someone he witnessed being carried off like a bag of meat. "No," he said, twitching his eyelids as they gradually parted. "For now, I'll give this guy my attention. I'd like to observe. I'm curious to see." Naruto opened his eyes fully and squinted at the white light emanating from the room. Colors gradually started to mix in with the whiteness. Hazy outlines soon emerged, but to his dismay, he discovered that he was still unable to distinguish distinct shapes. It was all just a blur. "Now, you must learn some patience, Naruto-kun. Sometimes being too impulsive can lead to harsh consequences." Stopping, Naruto cocked his head in the direction of the voice. He could only make out a mass of red and white in the blur. He squinted his eyes slowly, trying to get more focus. He could eventually make out a slightly distinct shape over time. He could hardly see the thin black thing that was protruding from this person's mouth because the red on their head had taken on more of a hat-like appearance. It caused Naruto's eyes to widen. It shouldn't be able to happen. J.G. Chan, with a smile, Sarutobi approached the boy who appeared extremely vulnerable. He collapsed to his knees, bringing himself up to the boy's eye level, and embraced him right away. A smile spread across his face as he gently stroked the boy's head. Naruto recalled him. He still remembers him in spite of all the trauma he had endured. It's been a long time now, hasn't it, Naruto-kun? It shocked Naruto. How did he get here? The only adult who had not looked at him with hatred in his eyes was Hokage. Gigi. Naruto had only ever desired him as an adult. He resembled the grandpa he had never met. Even though he was hazy, seeing him now again was nearly unbearable. Where am I? It's all right now, Naruto-kun. You're home now, you're safe. At home. What does Gigi mean when she talks about this, home? Naruto, for his part, was reluctant to inquire. The village never felt like home to him. He was always given cheap goods for exorbitant prices, beaten, and called names. To make ends meet, he had to spend his monthly stipend very carefully. No, he didn't think of the village as his home. At best, it served as a shelter, and at worst, a prison. But now that he's free of that snake and his tortoise experiments, he would take this village over anything else. With his eyes shut, Naruto buried his head in the Hokage's shoulder. Even just for Gigi, he'll stay put. That caught his attention. Now, Naruto-kun. I'm sure that this will come as a surprise to you, but please bear with me. With a slow nod, Naruto moved away from the elderly Hokage. He could not recall a single instance in which Gigi had lied to him, and judging from the tone of his voice, this appears to be a serious issue. Well, Naruto-kun, do you remember what I have taught to you about clans and families? Slowly, Naruto nodded his head. He hazily recalled the lessons about some prominent families in the village that Gigi had chosen to impart to him. Upon reflection, he realized that the two that were particularly noticeable were named Hyuga and Uchiha. Something the Hokage had said seemed to have stuck those two more in his memory than the others, though he couldn't recall why. There were two important families called Hyuga and Uchiha. I don't really remember why they were so important though. Sarutobi grinned and said, "It's good enough." After all, he couldn't really expect much from Naruto. When he chose to teach the boy was 4 years old. He mostly listened for the sake of memorization, and considering the years and the trauma that followed, he doubted that he would remember. Now, one of those families, the Hyuga clan, has decided to formally adopt you. That truly was shocking. How on earth could a prominent family want him? Naruto seriously doubted his uniqueness. The villagers had actually stated on several occasions how special they thought he was. So why would a clan that Jijin had mentioned openly as being significant decide to adopt him out of the blue? Once again, Sarutobi spoke as though reading his mind. His voice carried a hint of regret this time. The Hyuga clan had lost 3 important people to them. Hyuga Hinako, the matriarch of the clan, along with Hyuga Hikari and Hyuga Ume, both members of the main house, were abducted the same night as Yubai Orochimaru. I'm sure you remember them now. Naruto did recall them, he thought. They were most likely the 2 inmates he had briefly seen when being taken to a different room. That Hinako person had most likely been the elder Nei-san. Hikari or Ume was most likely the other one. Where was the other one then? Her expression was one of agony and anguish. Her eye sockets were bloody and empty. With wide eyes, Naruto pushed himself away from Sarutobi right away. Just as the Hokage was going to inquire as to what was wrong, Naruto bent over and spat out whatever was in his stomach. Naruto was still spitting up his stomach contents when Sarutobi quickly arrived and began to gently pat the boy's back. When he was finally finished, Naruto just stood there, trembling terribly from what he had just discovered. I have one of those Sans eyes, Naruto said, slowly raising his hands to shield the eyes. He felt ill all over, so very, very sick. To think that they were once the property of someone else, someone he had witnessed being taken away like rancid meat. It made him feel like a reptile. No, he found that to be too good. It made him feel strange. Is it because I now have the same eyes as them that they want to adopt me? Sarutobi scowled at the boy's dejected expression. Although it is understandable that the news must have come as a shock to him, it was predictable that hopelessness would lead him to believe he would only be adopted due to his similarities. That shouldn't be in Naruto. Better was due to him. Naruto. They don't want you simply because of that reason. The matriarch of the clan is Hyuga Hanako, one of those who had been taken by Orochimaru the same night as you. She told me that while she had not seen a lot of the experiments, she had seen enough to be disgusted. She wants to protect you. Simple as that. It seems that one of the Sans was a matriarch after all. That, if anything, increased Naruto's skepticism. Still, he did not say anything. He had too much on his mind, and the last thing he wanted was to add to his already overwhelming confusion. They remained silent for some time. Sarutobi was concerned about the young boy sitting next to him, his mental state, and whether or not he could ever fit in with the clan that marks members of its branch with a permanent sign of servitude. Despite having suffered relatively few losses, the clan remained impartial when it came to suggesting that Naruto become a state after learning that he had turned into a demon container. It was difficult to determine the clan's exact position on the issue because, for the most part, they had declined to voice their opinions. Whether Hanako desired to adopt Naruto into the clan was irrelevant. Nothing can be done for him if the clan itself disapproved of the idea. Though I suppose there shouldn't be much trouble if Hanako can convince Hiyashi of the matter. It's possible that Hiyashi was the most convincing speaker in the council, which meant that he was the most convincing speaker in the entire village. The boy's chances would greatly increase if he supported Naruto's adoption into the clan. Sarutobi suspected Hiyashi would follow suit. When he saw him with Hanako the previous day, the man appeared to be extremely whipped. The strangeness of it almost made Sarutobi shake his head. The wife of Hyuga Hiyashi, who was regarded as the clan's shy but devoted matriarch, gave him a whipping. Hyuga Hiyashi was arguably the most powerful and influential member of the council. He felt that he would have needed to stoop down and pick up his fallen jaw if he hadn't grown so old and witnessed so much. But would Naruto enjoy it? He cast his eyes down to the young child in front of him. It's possible that the Hyuga clan would treat him with the same contempt as the other villagers, even if he were adopted. The clan might behave similarly to the villages, following the rules in front of their leaders but rebelling and attacking the boy when no one is around. The worst that could happen is that the Hyugas would have to deal with him after branding him with the curse seal. For his part, Naruto was cautious about being adopted. He had seen people's faces when they adopted the other orphans since he was a small child living in the orphanage. They had scowled at him when they had looked at him, treating him like a piece of refuse that they could trod on. The previous caregiver was decent enough, but after he passed away, his replacement took over, and that woman had no qualms about making his life as miserable as possible. Since then, he had never trusted an adult other than the elderly Hokage. Would it really make a difference if the Hyuga took him in? He had no idea that the clan would be as horrible as the previous caretaker. They might even be more detrimental. Now, if you have calmed down enough, Hanako-san had wanted to see you. Do you want to come and meet her? Did he want to go see this woman who would become his caregiver in the end? For him, it wasn't entirely a bad thing, even though he remained skeptical of the concept. Who knows, perhaps she wasn't so much against him as she was fond of him. Naruto said, "All right." He got off the bed slowly and walked toward the door, almost knocking over a few pieces of furniture. Even with his eyes squinted, he was only able to make out a few hazy colors and shapes. It irritated me. He could not see a damn thing, it was so damned annoying. He would have had no trouble moving around if he had his eyes, his old eyes. When his knee unintentionally collided with a metal post, Naruto winced. The fact that he hardly even knew where the door was didn't help either. Stumbling around in circles and running into things made him feel like a foolish person. A hand was put on his shoulder. "Here, Naruto-kun," and the boy was soon being led in a different direction. "I think it would be better if I were to lead." Naruto would need to concur. Hanako was humming a little tune she had learned when she was younger, her eyes closed. It was very quiet in her recovery room at that moment. Through the open windows, sunlight streamed into her room, casting a palpably healing glow. However, the cool breeze that blew in was just what she had grown to love about the village. Outside, she could hear the birds chirping softly in a pitch that was almost harmonious. She could also hear the commotion of human activity, which meant that this village was busy, prosperous, and that everyone was working hard. If she were to ignore the silent statue that was her husband, she would find it to be incredibly peaceful. At this, Hanako's gentle smile vanished, and she also stopped humming. With her husband, what was there for her to consider? There was no denying her deep love for him. Ultimately, Hinata and Hanabi served as evidence of her love and loyalty to her husband. The Hiyashi she had known all along, though, was that just a mask he put on her? If it had been any other person, she would have tried a Juken strike directly to the heart of that person for his treatment of Hinata, her beloved daughter who was so sweet. Was the Hiyashi she married the real one? The creature concealed by the mask? The day she had wed the man who had come before her was still fresh in her memory. She was a promising medic.nin back then, rising to a rank worthy of a chunin within its own hierarchy at 15. After a year of employment, the main family unexpectedly informed her that she was to become engaged to Hyuga Hiyashi and that the birdcage seal on her forehead needed to be taken off right away. One of the best times in her life had been that one. Though she would be the first to admit that her attraction to his twin, Hyuga Hizashi, was almost as strong, if only because they were identical in appearance. She had always been smitten with Hyuga Hiyashi despite the animosity that the branch section had for the members of the main branch. She felt that Hiyashi had stolen her heart ever since that one moment when he had saved her from falling off a tree when she was 10 years old. To her, Hiyashi had been one of the more compassionate main branch members that she had ever seen. It was almost too good to be true to learn that he would be her betrothed. However, it wasn't. Everything was real. She married Hiyashi, who was 28 years old, when she was 16. She thought she could give the man her heart, and even though they were so different in age, she thought he would reciprocate. Everything went wonderfully. Even after learning of her betrothal, she expressed her love for him, and he reciprocated. Together, they were able to change their marriage from one based on blood purity to one based on love. She found out she was pregnant with their child not long after they had tied the knot. She saw immediately that the man was ecstatic, despite the composed exterior he maintained. He would place his hand over her stomach on calm nights when they were the only two sleeping together, and she would glimpse the brief flash of a very warm smile. She would cuddle up to her cherished husband and put her head in the bend of his neck during those times when she felt the most at ease. She used to think that her husband and the unborn child inside of her were the only things that mattered in the world. She believed that their love had finally come full circle with the birth of little Hinata. At first glance, their young daughter was so stunningly beautiful that all she wanted to do was hold her in her arms forever. Similarly, Hiyashi had lavished months of attention on their first child, to the extent that he would literally be out of breath when he returned from meetings. Hiyashi's branch member escort would occasionally tell her about how he would watch the time during meetings and just drum his fingers. He would be the first out the door, leaving with a brusque note of adjournment. That had likely been as charming as it was funny. In fact, her love for him only deepened. Then Hinata got pregnant once more, 4 years after Hinata was born. Since that was her first pregnancy, a lot of ordinary citizens believed that she was only 20.1 years old. Hanako was once again engulfed in the delights of being pregnant, so she made no attempt to correct them. If anything, Hiyashi's mask cracked more than it had during her first pregnancy because he had fussed over her even more. Hanako had always noticed his admiration for him and his much more obvious concern for his health. And then she had been taken away from her after giving birth to Hanabi. She had been compelled to bear heartache for 9 whole months, never being able to move while little Uzumaki's cries reverberated through the corridors. That cunning Kabuto had forced a woman she saw as another daughter to be raped and forced to bear his child, and she had been left with no choice but to sit and do nothing. She was forced to watch helplessly as Kabuto dragged an unconscious Uzumaki, his new eyes bandaged and bleeding, and heard Hikari's last dying screams. Hanako believed that the agonizing days would have continued indefinitely, but somehow, for the amusement of that snake medic.nin, or for some other reason, she was set free along with her other daughter. Figure, Ume, the young Uzumaki, and the baby that was Hikari's legacy. When she awoke again, her home was looking after her, and she was soon reunited with her beloved husband, Hiyashi. However, how could he have succeeded? Her husband refused to look at her when she saw Hinata fidgeting and genuinely trembling with fear, and she realized right away that he was the one who had mistreated their priceless child. Why? How on earth could he do something like that? He refused to respond when she pressed him on the matter. She then expressed her rage vocally, but all he did was bow his head and accept her verbal abuse. She was not at all satisfied with that. Rather than watching him take her blows and act as though nothing would change, she wanted to know why. Then an idea occurred to her. She wished to see how self-assured and disciplined her husband really was. She therefore made the decision that she would ask the Hokage to adopt Lil Uzumaki right away when they met. Hiyashi was naturally taken aback by what had transpired. That was definitely not what her husband was expecting, and she was happy about that. She would know if, as he claimed to be, he had been treating them like a mask the entire time. The Hyuga clan had no intention of adopting Lil Uzumaki. He will become a member of the family after being adopted by hers. She will be present to keep an eye on her husband's actions and make sure that he treats the village outcast in the same manner as he does his daughters. She did not, of course, choose to adopt Uzumaki merely as a means of controlling her husband. More than most orphans or even black sheep should have, the boy had suffered. Every time she had heard his screams, her heart had sung with pain, and whenever she had been able to see him, she had silently begged for forgiveness, forgiving herself for not being able to help him. He could easily become the creature the villagers fear him to be now that he has a wall around his heart. Hanako is most afraid of what will happen to the young boy who told her 3 years ago that he would beat up all the big bad bullies for Nae-san. Even with her sadness for him, Hanako managed a half smile. That had been one of her favorite memories of the boy who had once been a ball of energy that never stopped. That day, she had been strolling through the forests, appreciating the peace they offered her, when she had heard a tiny creak. It was a tiny place, nearly obscured by trees and rocks, but it shone with an astonishing clarity. She had not been able to see anything like that since. It was almost like a pure river. Suddenly, as she knelt to collect the glistening water, the bushes trembled, and a small boy, perhaps 3 years old, leapt into the crack. Hanako felt that the boy's sapphire blue eyes penetrated her soul more deeply than the Byakugan masters. As the two had been staring at each other for an eternity, she had the impression that the young boy could now see every aspect of her, judge her for what she truly was, a sinful beast or a pure creature. At last, the boy grinned and gestured to her with a cute, round hand. His little tones suddenly burst out like a musical note as he opened his mouth. "You're a pretty Nae-san." That was the icebreaker. Hanako grinned at the thought. She recalled how she struck up a conversation with the young boy, who even at that age showed an astonishing level of maturity. Even though his mind was still developing, the young Uzumaki Naruto appeared to have already learned the importance of handling objects with care and managing money. She was amazed that such a young boy could pick up on these qualities so quickly, as even some adults struggled with them. Naturally, the topic of why she was in that glaring groan came up, and she ashamedly admitted that she got lost. At that point, the adorable little boy leapt to his feet and grasped her hands. "Don't worry, Nae-san. I'll take you back and I'll make sure that I'll beat up all those big bad bullies for Nae-san." She had rewarded him with a kiss on his forehead when they had returned to the village entrance because it was such a sweet and adorable sentence. She had not realized then that he really spent more time in the forest, getting to know trees rather than roads and alleys. Because of the intense prejudice against the boy at the time, she was unaware that he had reached adulthood. She just couldn't say no to him because she thought his resolve was so incredibly adorable. Hanako can presume with confidence that Lil Uzumaki has forgotten those events, now that she thinks about it. No matter how old a child gets, at some point their mind will discard old memories in favor of an increasing number of new ones. She doubted that he would remember her as the person he vowed to protect from all those bullies, given the trauma that little Uzumaki endured over the course of the next 3 years. She felt hurt by it. Knowing that a child as innocent as her own priceless daughter was subjected to so many cruel acts was such a painful feeling. The knowledge that the child was blameless for all sins and that the only thing defending the world against the hideous force inside his stomach was his will hurt even more. He was worthy of much better, and it was okay if she was the only one who could provide him with that opportunity. The knocks on the door seemed to come just right, startling both the silent Hiyashi and the aware Hanako out of their reveries. After exchanging a quick look, the matriarch cleared her throat and called out to the strangers outside. "Come in." The Sandame Hokage, Sarutobi, entered as the door slowly opened, and yet, the young boy that had been on her mind was right there with him. The bandages have been taken off, but it doesn't appear like much was done to treat his eyes because he was squinting, staring at objects, and running into furniture. Sarutobi grinned and said, "I hope we haven't been interrupting anything, Hanako." When he noticed the tension that persisted in the room, the slightly lessened. It was quickly vanishing, but it was a clear indication of the gulf that had emerged between the husband and wife. Hanako didn't want to get back into her husband bossing mode. It's no trouble." She noticed right away that the little blonde boy in front of her had somewhat unfocused eyes as she slowly looked down at him. She smiled kindly at him in spite of this. "Hello again, Naruto-kun." After turning to face the voice and observing the blob of colors in front of him, Naruto made a small bow in recognition that the voice belonged to the matriarch. "Hi," was his halting response. It's a pleasure to meet you, Hyuga-san." Hanako concealed a grin. It's obvious that manners were not his strong point, and it's likely that he was inherently bashful and constantly hid behind that smile. Hanako said, "It's a pleasure to meet you too." She slowly rose from her bed, ignoring her husband's apparent sudden tenseness, and knelt down in front of the boy, close enough that he didn't need to look around. "I assume that Hokage-sama has told you about what I plan." Naruto gave a nod. "Then, are you willing to accept?" Now, Naruto shut his eyes. The three applicants waited in silence for the little boy to make his decision. His eyes were fixed in a determined expression when he opened them again. Hanako grinned and said, "Yeah, I'll accept the adoption." She was happy. She can now offer him the home he so richly deserves. Naruto looked up and met her almost directly in the eye, saying, "But..." He turned away from the matriarch, unaware that she had been caught completely off guard. "I don't want charity. It's okay if I have a place to sleep in. But I don't want to ask for much more. When the time comes and I can finally become a shinobi, then I would like to leave and live on my own again." Her desire was to provide him with a family and a place to live, where he could feel some warmth in his life. And he was refusing to accept it, somehow? "I don't want to intrude with your clan any more than I will." Yes, that was the cause. Naruto is incapable of fully trusting people again due to the trauma he has endured. Undoubtedly, he is even more dubious that the Hyuga would decide to adopt him. Or perhaps being adopted into a family as big as theirs makes him feel even more in danger. Maybe it had been too fast. Hanako was aware of Naruto's extensive suffering, but at the time, she was far too engrossed in the possibilities to give it any thought. Despite the fact that it should have been clear to anyone paying close attention, she had not realized at the time that his reaction would be as it was. Glancing in the direction of the elderly Hokage, Naruto asked, "So, you are saying that you are willing to become a ward, but not an official member?" And nodded. Sarutobi looked up at the ceiling with a contemplative noise. Decisions and their aftermath raced through his mind, trying to figure out if this was the right one or not. None was discovered by him. Or, at least, he didn't discover anything that would endanger young Naruto's future. The elderly Hokage turned to face the youngster in front of him and saw that he was still wearing that look of extreme determination. He knew from experience that when someone with Naruto's personality behaves in that way, there is no turning back from their choice. He admitted, "Very well. Then Naruto-kun is hereby considered a ward of the Hyuga clan." Although it was not what she had desired, it sufficed. With a warm embrace, Hanako embraced the boy with a smile on her face. She just wanted to provide him with a home, and he remained extremely wary of people. It's okay. It will take some time for him to become at ease in her company. Now that she has time that she can use to heal the wounds that have developed between her and everyone she has ever cared about. She'll see to it that he is included as well. As soon as she hugged him, Naruto tensed up. What was this feeling, and why? It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, this intensely warm feeling that gave him a sense of security. Oh my god, what is this? With a slow, deep breath, Naruto closed his eyes and let her embrace him. It was an odd feeling that gave him a sense of security and concern. It really is amazing. With a start, Hanako opened her eyes and saw Naruto fall forward. In a panic, she drew back quickly and laid him down. Had something occurred? Had he just passed out? The little boy fell farther, and to her surprise, landed softly against her chest. When Hanako drew away just enough to see his face, she discovered that Naruto had abruptly dozed off during their embrace. As the boy nestled against her, she let out a quiet sigh. He just dozed off, nothing more. He stayed snuggled in until he found a cozy spot to settle into, seemingly enjoying the warmth her hug had given him as well. With a smile, Hanako looked down at the sleeping boy. "Rest, Naruto-kun. You've earned it. Everyone, I would like to introduce to you a new student. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, he was not able to attend classes at the beginning of the school term. Still, I expect everyone to treat him with respect." The young blonde approached the silent class and bowed. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you." There was not a cheer. Instead, they were all absorbed in examining the blonde boy in front of them. His small stature gave the impression that he was even younger than they were. However, he appeared much older than he actually was thanks to those pupilless eyes that seemed to radiate pure indifference. Occasionally, students with shinobi parents find themselves reminded of their parents by those eyes. He appeared fragile, as if he could break at the slightest touch, and his slender frame was further emphasized by the seemingly oversized white shirt he was wearing. At the same time, he held himself taut, as if prepared to respond to anything. Lastly, they are reminded of a feral person who was more attuned to the wild by the whisker. Like scars that adorned both sides of his cheeks. Or it made him appear cute to the female students. Cute. Naruto was ready for the icy looks he had seen so many times in his life when he looked up. He accepted that there was a good chance they would look down on him and deny his existence. This was not what he had anticipated. The boys were mostly glancing at him indifferently, brushing his arrival off as just another student in their class. The boys had started clapping, but it was an act of forced civility. Conversely, the girls were starting to flush. He was honestly unnerved by the whispers and giggles that some of them were making as they clapped. What on earth were they discussing? What was it about those watching eyes that made him feel like a hamster on a wheel, just amuse? Repressing a shiver, Naruto decided not to investigate the matter further. When he gets there, he has to get to that point. He just wanted to step out of the spotlight for the time being. The boy looked up at his new instructor, who smiled awkwardly at him. "All right, then. I guess we have to find you a seat now, don't we? Let's see." He cast a quick glance around the room, trying to find a vacant chair that would seem to fit him. However, Naruto's attention was already fixed on the one seat in front of him. He started walking up the stairs toward the empty seat that had his attention without even looking at anyone else. Naruto looked at the person seated next to it as soon as he arrived at it. "Is this seat taken?" He smiled at the person in front of him, his warm lavender and dull deep sea blue meeting. The person blushed prettily and moved her bag away from the table to make room for him. No. You can sit here." Naruto took a seat and nodded in appreciation. He looked over to the person seated across from him, extended a hand, and said hello. "Uzumaki Naruto." The person's face, if anything, flushed even more when she took his hand in hers and whispered her own introduction. Hyuga Hinata." With a slight smile that belied his knowing, Naruto turned back to face the Chunin instructor. Iruka started lecturing right away after noticing that Naruto had already selected a seat. The students started gathering their notes and pencils, getting ready for yet another boring day of notes and lectures. There was a shuffling of bodies. As they made their way back to the Hyuga complex together, Hinata cast a worried glance at Naruto and said, "Anyo. Was that a good idea to trick the whole class?" Back then, Naruto had suggested that they pose as amiable strangers to trick the entire class into believing that he was in the Hyuga's care. He was able to persuade her to agree to his plan because she had a small, mischievous side that had been hidden for a while. But when they started their ruse, she soon found herself wondering why. Were they forced to hide their friendship because it was such a bad thing? If not, was Naruto merely acting in this way to get even with the teachers and students? She was curiously uneasy as their ruse persisted throughout the day, even though she was unsure of the reason. She desired greater freedom to communicate with him. She desired to show him the respect he deserved as a close friend. Naruto answered, "I can't say that's a good idea, but I don't think it would be a good idea to show everyone that we're friends." He gave her a sidelong glance, answering cautiously before moving on. "Many of the villagers hate me. I don't know why, but they like to treat me like dirt. For all I know, my parents could have been dishonorable to the village, or they simply hate the fact that I was born on the eve of the Kyuubi's defeat. All I know is that they treat me worse than dirt, and I know for a fact that some of their kids are in the class. When word spreads out that Uzumaki Naruto is now in the academy, the kids will no doubt be told by their moms and dads that I'm a bad person, that I'm someone to be hated." If someone else had witnessed the two of them, they would have been astonished beyond comprehension that the typically reserved heiress had just yelled out, "But you're not." When Hinata heard her voice grow louder than before, she let out a little eep, and embarrassedly covered her mouth. She turned to face the blonde, whose expression was full of surprise as he looked at her. If anything, her shame increased. She hadn't intended to interrupt him so abruptly, loudly, and angrily. She simply didn't want him to further diminish himself. All she wanted to do was show him that he wasn't the monster that everyone had painted him as. All she wanted was to support him. "It's already too late. I have to say it again, I have to go on." With a determined look, little Hinata met Naruto's eyes and refocused her determination. "Naruto-kun isn't a monster. He's a kind boy who tried to make many friends. I don't want you to keep talking about yourself like that." It surprised Naruto. No, he wasn't merely taken aback. He was completely confused. The blonde was unaware that Hinata was capable of erupting with such venom. It was just as well that she did, because her words had just jarred into his consciousness. This was something he would never forget. Hey, despite their differences in temperament, Naruto recognized aspects of Hyuga Hiyashi in his daughter. Given that the clan chief had addressed the Hyuga elders with nearly identical remarks, how could he not? Remembering what had happened only a few days before, the young boy raised his head to the sky. Retrospective. In fact, Naruto was not at all frightened or anxious around the Hyuga elders and their apparent X-ray vision. Their looks now met with equally indifferent stares, eyes that had previously intimidated him to such a profound degree. Even so, if only out of obligation to respect his wife's choice, it was somewhat comforting to know that someone was standing beside him. Hyuga Hiyashi, who was standing in for his wife to give his decision on the adoption case, was also there, meeting the elders' gazes. With their eyes fixed only on the blonde in front of them, the head elder, Hyuga Shiro, spoke calmly. "We have heard young Uzumaki's reason for wanting to be adopted here, and we have heard the pleas of your wife, Hanako. Dono. However, the question remains. What will be in our clan's favor for harboring Uzumaki-san?" Passively, Naruto returned their gaze. One would have to question whether he felt any emotion at all given how emotionless he was in response to the amount of pressure being applied to the room. That kind of pressure shouldn't be on any boy his age to handle like it's nothing out of the ordinary. Hiyashi broke the silence by stepping forward and accepting the boy's adoption in response to the elder's prudence. "Would offering our protection to young Uzumaki be in our clan's best interest? The boy is already under the protection of Sandaime. Sama, true, but have you considered who else had him in their favor?" A general silence fell, with some of the elders averting their eyes almost shamefully. Naruto arched an eyebrow at that. Who painted him in such a positive light that the Hyugas become complacent at the mere mention of this person? Hiyashi narrowed his eyes at his own father, the head elder, who met his gaze calmly. "During the battle with the Kyuubi no Kitsune, our clan suffered the least casualties. This is only because the Kyuubi's rampage was stopped before it could reach our sector. I cannot hope to imagine what would have happened had the Kyuubi stayed on its path of destruction. If anything, none of us would be here." Hiyashi looked down, and for a split second, Naruto was almost positive that a flicker of pain and nostalgia appeared in his eyes. "Are we so ungrateful that we are to deny Uzumaki's right to be protected when he holds the hope of the one who defeated the Kyuubi?" Hiyashi asked. "Are we to throw away the legacy of Yandaime, Sama?" A tense quietness enveloped the council chamber. The elders, divided as they are between the blood, tightening debt of honor owed to Yandaime, Sama, and what they believe is best for their clan, were using this time to weigh their options. However, Naruto discovered that his thoughts had abruptly stopped in space and time, repeatedly stopping on that same sentence. Legacy of Yandaime. Sama, what did that mean, exactly? With his skin getting wet, his heartbeat quickening, and his nerves tingling with excitement, Naruto's eyes were wide and filled with fear. What was wrong with that expression? Was he the Yandaime's legacy? Really? Not possible. Why would he be the one who leaves behind his legacy? Hiyashi-san, the clan leader said as he looked down from the gloomy elders and calmly met Naruto's terrified gaze. It did not help to calm him down to see those eyes acting so calm when his own were probably raging with emotions. What did you mean by Yandaime? Sama's legacy? Though it was soon covered up, there was that fleeting flash of pain and nostalgia in Hiyashi's eyes once more. The young blonde received a clear message from the clan head, who then turned back to face the elders. "It is not my place to tell. If you truly want to know, you must ask Sandaime, Sama himself, for the information. It's not for him to say." What was meant by that? Why could he not tell him? Anxiously, Naruto bit his lip at this. Was it so secretive that not even the head of the clan could discuss it? Why? The head elder's voice pierced the awkward silence between Hiyashi and Naruto, saying, "Hiyashi." With haste, the two turned back to Hyuga Shiro, who had now risen from his seat alongside the other elders. "We have thought it over. We have pondered over the consequences in harboring young Uzumaki, but we have also thought about the possible rewards as well. As far as we can tell, the rewards more than make up for it." The elder bowed his head to the young blonde. "We also owe it to Yandaime. Sama. We will make sure that his legacy will be cared for. We welcome you, Uzumaki Naruto, into our clan." Finale flashback. That was the end of it. As the ward of the clan, Naruto had received full acceptance and had received good treatment from the Hyuga thus far. Still, something bothered him greatly. He was suddenly referred to as the legacy of the Yandaime by Hyuga Hiyashi, and it appeared that the majority of the grown-ups were also aware of this title. The fact that he was ignorant of this bothered him. What made him referred to as the Yandaime's legacy? How come he, who most likely had no connection to the great leader at all, was chosen to be the one the Yandaime left behind? Hiyashi had informed him that he needed to speak with Gigi to find out more, but he has been reluctant to do so ever since. Naruto was afraid to investigate the reason behind his title, despite his strong desire to know. He is known as Yondaime's legacy by the locals. Unless Yondaime Sama had passed away, which he had 6 years ago, he wouldn't need a legacy. What relationship did he have with that man if he was to be remembered as his legacy? Naruto-kun. The boy stopped thinking and looked back at the heiress who was strolling beside him. Hinata watched anxiously, not understanding why he had suddenly stopped talking. Something was bothering him, and she didn't like that she couldn't support him with it. Naruto gave her a tiny, comforting smile and shook his head. He answered, "It's nothing. I was just thinking about how everything still seems the same, that's all." The boy smiled. "It's nothing, don't worry about it. Come on, I'll race you back." After taking a few sprints, Naruto turned around and motioned for her to come along. Though Hinata allowed herself to push those thoughts to the back of her mind, it still troubled her to see him back there, lost in what appeared to be negative thoughts. She ran up to meet Naruto, grinning at him. She wished these days could last forever as the two of them hurried back to the Hyuga complex. The matriarch of the Hyuga clan bowed her head in acknowledgement, but she kept walking until she left the complex and entered their large backyard. "Hanako. Sama, is it really alright for you to be walking around? You are still weak from your period of confinement." Hanako took in the serene atmosphere of their clan's garden as she stood in the middle of it. It appeared as though the village's usual cacophony had completely subsided, leaving a private space of delightful quiet. Is it because the Hyugas reside in the most tranquil area of the village? This feels nice, doesn't it, Neji-kun? With a smile, Hanako turned back to face her escort. Her nephew, a young branch member, didn't appear to be having any fun at all. Instead, he had the appearance of a wall. "I'm sorry, Hanako. Sama, but I don't understand what you were trying to say." And she forced herself not to sigh aloud. She couldn't hold it against her beloved nephew for his behavior. Ultimately, had Hizashi not been the one who had gone and killed her husband instead of the main family? Even though Hizashi had offered his assistance, Neji would surely accuse the main family of being the reason behind his father's demise. He would consider it sinful that the head of the family used it to prolong the lives of its members. Given that she was formerly a member of the branch family, the young boy would undoubtedly view her as a traitor. Her only connection to the main family came through her marriage to Hiyashi. He was, if anything, the most resentful of her. She had to keep trying, though. The final thing one should associate with Hizashi is Neji. If anything, she owed that man an opportunity to see Neji through his shell once more. Though, at the moment, it appeared to be a challenging task. She had to try, though. Grinning at the boy, Hanako turned to face the sky, feeling the soft currents of breeze brush past her. She looked back down towards her indifferent nephew and arched an eyebrow. "I mean to be outside Neji-kun. I mean that it feels nice to be able to feel the breeze of a gentle wind and to have it caress you with almost an intimate touch. Don't you like to feel it too?" She met her question with an icy stare. At the question, Neji pressed his lips together and squinted. Hanako could see his fists trembling with barely contained rage even from where she was. She was, if anything, expecting him to lash out at her right then. However, he didn't. The boy was content with a glare instead, something Hanako would never tell him to do, and a few icy words. Even if the wind is to touch a person as intimate as you say, it is only to mask its true intentions. The wind is the cage that holds a bird. Should the bird try and fly away, it'll be killed in a second without remorse. Neji turned away from her and started walking away from her. "Excuse me, but I have urgent matters to attend to. Good day, Hanako. Sama." With sadness, Hanako observed Neji vanish into the Hyuga complex. 3 years prior, when he was bursting with enthusiasm and pride for the Hyuga clan, she had remembered him. He had been so keen to uphold the branch family's code back then, believing it would extend the Hyuga's power. He was then deceived. The main family killed Hizashi in place of Hiyashi in order to stop Konoha and Kumo from going to war. After discovering this, Neji lost interest in being a Hyuga. He now perceived the main family as the oppressors who would stop at nothing to protect their own interests, even if it meant sacrificing branch members, and the mark of the branch family is nothing more than a cage. She was embarrassed to acknowledge that if given the choice, she would unquestionably put her husband's life at risk. The matriarch of Hyuga sighed sorrowfully. How is she going to handle him? Mother, we're home. She turned to face the back entrance, quickly forcing a smile to replace her melancholy expression. Hinata stood there, hunched over and breathless from effort. Naruto calmly approached her from behind, even though she could see he was perspiring. At that, she raised an eyebrow. Did they run? From where? Hinata, dear, why are you breathing so hard? The young Hyuga looked up, and her already red cheeks actually got redder. Anyo, was all she could say. Well. Leaning against the wall behind him, Naruto spoke languidly, we were racing. It's nothing to fuss over. Hinata and I were bored, so I went on and thought it would be more fun to run home as fast as we can. Oh? Hinako asked, glancing back and forth between Hinata and Naruto. One appeared anxious as she cutely poked her two fingers together. The other had his head turned, his features skillfully concealed in a sluggish, indifferent expression. She finally let out a sigh and shook her head while grinning. Well, I suppose it's good exercise for the two of you. Hinata looked up, clearly surprised that there was no punishment in sight, and Naruto just grinned at her. Hinako winked at her daughter as she leaned in close. Don't listen to the boring old men in our clan, Hinata. They don't know what's good for them. They'd rather stand tall and regal than to waste the energy to run and dirty their clothes. Her young daughter appeared shocked once more. At last, her eyes sagged and she started to fiddle a little again. But, the rules came from father. Hanako's smile softened a little, and Naruto saw it right away. Her smile returned as she put a finger to her lips in a silent sign, saying, well, I suppose he only wants what's best for you. But don't worry, I won't tell. A shy smile replaced Hinata's disbelief. Thank you, she exclaimed with gratitude. With a warm embrace, Hanako smiled and encircled her daughter. After all this time, it felt good to feel her daughter again. Unfortunately for her, Hinata had become rigid at the first touch. Hanako and Naruto had not missed that brief moment of rigidity, despite the fact that she swiftly returned the action. Confusion at Hinata's momentary stiffening, the boy arched an eyebrow from where he stood. That's odd. Is there a reason why she still acts strange around her mother? After giving her a gentle pat on the head, Hanako gently pushed her daughter away. She gave a sweet order, now go in. And make sure you finish whatever homework that the academy gave you. You can work on other things once you've finished. With a shy smile and a nod, Hinata turned to face her mother and hurried into the compound. A sense of longing welled up in the Hyuga matriarch as she watched her daughter go, a forlorn expression on her face. Even after a year of being apart, she yearned to be near her daughter and show her love. She was aware, though, that Hinata still required some alone time. One cannot simply erase the wounds caused by mental abuse. In order to assist her daughter in healing, she had to exercise patience. She was abruptly interrupted from her thoughts by footsteps. The matriarch looked over her shoulder, unsure of who it might be, until she realized it was Naruto who had been propped up against the wall. She decompressed and gave the boy a sincere smile that he appeared to comprehend. With little urgency, the two started their slow journey back into the Hyuga compound. Hanako cast a sidelong glance at the boy in front of her, whose hands were tucked into his pants pockets as he gazed blankly at the complex. The way a few minor adjustments had made him seem like a stranger unnerved her a little. Naruto was a seemingly happy boy then, with eyes the color of the sky. Now practically all of that joy had vanished, leaving behind a more reserved boy with serious features reminiscent of a seasoned shinobi. The fact that his new, deep ocean blue eyes gave him an even more alienated appearance didn't help either. Do I look like a freak? She was completely taken aback by the unexpected question. She had not anticipated that he would notice her examining him closely. The fact that he so casually described himself as a freak only made her more uncomfortable. She put a soft hand on his shoulder and shook her head. She muttered back, no, you don't look like one at all. Really? Naruto asked, gazing up at her with disbelieving eyes. Hanako bent down and gave him a gentle hug, saying, really? You're a special boy, who's been given a gift. It's only because the villagers cannot see it that way that they shun you. But I see it that way, and for that, I don't think you're a freak at all. Naruto said nothing, choosing instead to just stand happily in her arms. You're not at all a freak. You are a blessing and a constant reminder that the lives of those who gave their all were not in vain. The night was very cold, almost too cold. The chilly night air outside had most people in the village staying inside, as they were reluctant to venture outside. There are, of course, a few clear exceptions. Hyuga Hinata shifted around agitatedly on her futon, searching for the ideal position to ultimately drift off to sleep. She detested nights such as these. She would find it extremely difficult to sleep whenever it got cold enough, as it is right now, for some reason. Generally, only extreme exhaustion can cause her to pass out. Even stacking sheets on top of each other didn't help. She didn't think she would be going to sleep anytime soon. The young Hyuga sat up from her futon, frustrated. Trembling, she rose slowly and padded to her door. Perhaps a glass of water will help me fall asleep. There would be occasions when she would benefit from consuming any kind of liquid. There were the few times she could fall asleep after having something to drink, though most of those times involved a stressful state that needed to be relaxed. As Hinata slid her door open, she suppressed a yawn and came to a complete stop. The young Hyuga looked up at her complex's wall, where a bright moon was visible against a clear night sky. There, hunched over on the wall's roof, was a silhouette that appeared to be staring at something. She could only assume that this person was either going to slip out or sneak in, and neither of those scenarios is something she looks forward to. With haste, Hinata sealed her eyes and made a ram's hand seal. She recalled the instruction she had received from her father and elders since she was 3 years old, learning how to inject chakra into her eyes. She needed to use chakra control this once to identify the person, even though she had only mastered some of the more fundamental techniques. Byakugan. Hinata opened her eyes quickly, sensing the telltale signs of veins growing and realizing she only had a few moments left. She was able to extend her vision quickly and get a closer look at the person thanks to the strength of her Byakugan. She could also see more clearly in the dark thanks to her Dujutsu, which helped her identify that person right away. She let out a gasp upon seeing him. It was Naruto, crouching on the wall. She quickly turned off her Byakugan, bewildered. Why did Naruto get up and get dressed to go? His actions are obviously highly suspicious, and she couldn't help but think of the stories her father had told her about the Cloud Ninja and Uncle Hisashi's sacrifice. Was he planning on robbing someone else as well? Naruto abruptly leapt off the wall and was out of her line of sight. Determined to learn the truth, Hinata hurriedly put on a bulky jacket over her yukata and bolted from her room, determined to catch up to the blonde. Hiyashi. Sama, the clan chief said as he opened his eyes and calmly fixed his gaze on his wife. Hanako, however, appeared concerned. The footsteps from the main family complex's other side had been heard by both of them. Both of them were aware that Hinata and Naruto slept on that side of the complex. Hanako was concerned. Was her daughter being attempted to be abducted by another ninja? Perhaps a shinobi who was aware of Naruto's whereabouts was attempting to kidnap him so they could kill him covertly? Hiyashi took her arm gently as the matriarch sat up from their bed, about to bolt it and tail whoever had left those footsteps. When she raised a questioning gaze at him, he shook his head and pulled her back down gently. Hanako realized she didn't have time for idle play. A finger was placed against her lips to stop her from saying whatever it was she was going to say. Hiyashi. Sama. Why aren't we going after them? They could have taken Hinata or Naru. Startled, she raised her head to see her spouse observing her coolly, showing no signs of annoyance or bitterness. He appeared, if anything, reserved, as though he could take anything thrown at him. Let them go, my dear. They need to know about this the most. You already know who those footsteps belong to. Yes. Hiyashi took a moment to close his eyes and enjoy her warmth and company. Then who are they? Hiyashi sighed and straightened himself before speaking again. The first one was little Uzumaki. The second belonged to our daughter. He turned to face her and opened his eyes, meeting her gaze fearlessly and calmly. I've known ever since I presented my case to the Hyuga elders that Uzumaki would be wanting to seek answers. I merely provided the information and where to get the answers. If you were the boy, would you not want to know the reason behind your discrimination? That's true, but how will he take that news? Hiyashi averted his gaze, a look of concern emerging from nowhere. This was sufficient to get her interest. Hiyashi. Sama. A few months ago, I was one of the representatives sent as ambassadors for Sunagaku. During our week-long stay, I noticed something strangely familiar in that village. A boy was discriminated against, treated as a monster and never to be in touch with anyone. That boy was also a container for a sealed biju. Hanako let out a gasp. Does Suna have a container too? As I was staying there, I could not help but notice the similarities in how they are treated. However, that boy's exposure had already progressed much deeper than Uzumaki's. It certainly didn't help that the boy was an insomniac. It is highly likely that that boy's sanity will have already deteriorated by now due to both the insomnia he possesses and the discrimination the village gives him. If we are not careful, Uzumaki will be just like that. Hanako remained silent as she considered her husband's words. At last, she raised herself up on an elbow to look him in the eye. Quietly, she said, Tell me why you did what you did to our daughter. Navigating the levels of the Hokage Tower, Naruto remained silent. The guards were inside for the winter, so it was surprisingly easy to get past them. With just a few strategically placed puffs of sleeping gas, the guards fell like logs. This was his plan. He'd planned for this day ever since Hiyashi had mentioned him in his half. Identity. He's going to make sure now that the one person who knows the answer won't leave the tower without telling him. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto moved toward the last room, his attention so consumed with his work that he failed to notice the silent shadow lurking around the corner. Naruto stood in front of the Hokage's doors, and Hinata watched him with concern. He had gone so far as to knock out the guards because he had made the strange decision to see the elderly Hokage. Although she was unaware of the cause, she was aware that such behavior was illegal. She wished that he would not be punished. At first glance, he appeared solemn. He had never looked at her with that expression on his face before. Naruto-kun, what makes this so crucial? How come you couldn't wait? The door was shoved open, startling Hinata out of her reverie. She walked quickly over to the door and looked in. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto entered and met the serene gaze of Sandaime Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen. Like gentle rapids, the old Hokage met his gaze with calm. It infuriated him. Sarutobi nodded and closed his eyes, saying, "I think you know why I'm here, Gigi." "Yes," he answered. "Hiyashi told me to expect you to come." "Good." Naruto gave him a fierce look and gestured to the Yondaime's shadowy portrait. "First, you should be honest with yourself. Tell me why I'm called the Yondaime's legacy, and how this relates to the way I've been treated." Naruto approached Sarutobi and put his hands on the desk to support his forward lean. "Leave nothing out."
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.